بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. Peace be upon you. May Allah bless you. O glory, O Allah, I bear witness to your vast knowledge and your ability to know all that is going on during this meeting of thoughts and decisions. All praise are due to Allah for your generous grace, which we have been blessed with. O Allah, make us use your grace with your satisfaction. O Allah, give us strength and honesty in the performance of our duties. O Allah, bless us in every project and every period and every effort we make, and write us your satisfaction on all that we have accomplished and achieved. O Allah, give us of every work we do and the way we do it, guidance from you, happiness and the pleasure for us and for everyone we meet on this day. O Allah, we ask your blessing when we leave this place. O Allah, bless us in our families, bless us in our homes. O Allah, I bear witness to you that all of my grace is from you, and all what will be of me is a blessing of you. You alone have no partner for you. Thank you, Allah. Thank you, God, and God bless you all. Amen.
Thank you.
Will the audience please rise? Please follow me.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much for your participation this evening. We will now move on to our agenda order approval. We need to remove items 1 through 3. Item number 1, because it's under public comments, and 2 and 3, we don't have all the information for. Other than those changes, is there anything else the council would like? And if not, can I get a motion with those changes included?
Make a motion to approve the agenda order with those changes.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we will now move on to council business. Nothing. Okay,
Downtown looks very nice. Looks very nice.
yes.
It does.
And remember, we have a meeting next week and then no more until 2019.
No, we have one on
Or
the,
we have one more. 2 more. I'm off. For some reason, now that all the holiday decorations are up, it seems like December.
Yeah, don't get Christmas
coming.
that
That's
that
It's
quick.
It's
cold.
coming.
It seems like December. It was supposed to snow today. We got the city Christmas tree up last night. It's thrown everything off. Okay, we'll move on to staff comments. There are any? No. It's like I can't see everybody because of the whiteboard. Okay, then we'll move to our public comment, starting with the Cedar City Music Fest review.
Hi.
Hi, Mayor. Hi, Council. I'm Jessica Burr, and I'm the Assistant Director for the new Community and Academic Enrichment Department that is at SUU. We've been in existence for about a year, and this past September 15th, we hosted the Cedar Music Fest, and here's a video to show you, those of you who maybe weren't in attendance. Kit, do we have any volume?
I was there. Yeah, we did.
Scott was there. Down by the time and date, maybe.
That is still up to 100%.
On the main screen, down by the date, I think that one's still X'd out. Ta-da! Can we watch that one more time with volume?
That was our test drive.
While Kit's getting the promo up, oh, maybe we have it.
So, okay. Here we go again.
Thank you, Kit. The Cedar Music Fest we felt was a great success for several reasons. We brought in a little over 2,500 attendees to historic downtown that evening, and we brought in local bands as well as bands from Seattle. We also had several businesses that stayed open that evening for us, and they did very well, as we heard back in our survey that we sent out to the businesses. We also were able to showcase our food trucks and a lot of local talent as well as our street artists. We were also able to get the support from a lot of different entities. And in your report, on the front page is a quick summary overview of everyone who contributed. I'd like to point those out. The SU Alumni and Community Relations Office contributed, as well as this council signed off on the permit. Paul helped me run around the day of trying to get all my signatures in order. Historic Downtown also, they were our main initial supporters. Several are in this room today who gave their donations out of their own pocket, and we call them the originals. The Southern Utah Museum of Art, Southwest Tech, Cedar City Bryan Head Tourism Bureau, and several other businesses all stepped in and raised around $10,600 to help support this event. In addition, the city provided quite a bit of support that helped make this event possible. If you'll go over, we want to, over the next few pages, you'll see that our objectives, what they were, and that they were met. And the important part I want to point out is that we did survey not only the businesses who participated, but also the vendors and the attendees. And we got a really fantastic set of responses back. I was pleased to see that diversity was really represented at the event, not just in age, but there were all kinds of different artists there as well, which brought in a new group of people to downtown. We also had a fill in the blank question, and some of the comments is they want more vendors, more food trucks, more bands, and a beer garden. So that is to report on how the Cedar Music Fest went. The very back page also gives you an overview of our budget for the event. And the key points I also want to get across is that we were very successful. We had great feedback, but we would like to know moving forward if we can continue to gather support for this event. That's what will dictate if this event continues to move forward. And do you guys have any questions for me or anything else you'd like me to report about?
I think it was a great event. I know the wind didn't cooperate very well the first part of the day, right up until the event, but it sort of seemed to just die down when the
Did.
event started, so that was great. And my one comment would be is it got later in the evening because this was in September, but it got dark about 8 or 8:15-ish.
Hmm.
We need more light on that street, but I've
We
got
do.
some ideas for it.
I do too.
So, but it was very enjoyable. And I thought the food vendors seemed to be very busy and people seemed to be enjoying it. So, yeah, we'll just have to see how it progresses because I'd like to see it continue.
Yeah. I appreciate your support and being there that evening. Any other questions for me?
I was interested in your numbers. I remember when it was presented in that, I thought it was going to be a big SU poll too. And I see the lowest percentage was SUU age students that attended the event, and the highest percentage was over 55.
And the point of the event was,
Surprised me.
it did surprise me as well, because the night before was the paint dance at the university. But I was really happy to see that we had quite a wide demographic show up. And the point of the event was twofold. One, to showcase that our department now exists at SUU, but also my main goal was to bring the city and the university together to bring a really new, unique event to city and to bring people into historic downtown. So I was very happy to see that it wasn't just college students that were at our event.
Great.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks, Jessica.
Hey, thank you.
All right. Are there any other public comments at this point that don't deal with an agenda item?
Good evening, Tom Jett. I'd like to express a couple points here. One, it's the gratitude for this community that I've seen this last year. I mean, although we've grown quite a bit, it seems like there's a lot of assimilation, and it's not where they're not bringing just necessarily the habits or the experiences from where they're coming. They're growing into this community. That's number one. Number two, I think that's in part due to the leadership that is shown in this community, not just from this body, but all leaders in this community that have made an effort to contribute and give back to this community to make it what it is, set a tone for this community. The third point is, in this last year, I've watched a lot of things in this particular body take place with management and with city council. I haven't always agreed with some of the decisions, but I can honestly tell you, I have not seen one where I do not believe integrity or a firm belief in their decision was not there for when they made their decision. It wasn't, they didn't make their decision based on against, they made their decision based on for. And that's good. That's positive, that we're not doing what other communities we're looking forward and making our decisions based on what we believe is best for this community. So I'd like to just say thank you to all. And I would have said this last week, but you guys all left town and left me here. So thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
And nobody's attended all the meetings like you have, so.
Steve Nelson, Mayor. You commented about if it's on the agenda to wait, but I'm going to have a meeting at 6 and I have a comment about one of the agenda items. Can I still share it?
That's pushing it.
I know. Is that all right? I need your permission. You're the
all
boss.
The rest of us.
I'm sorry. I have a commitment with a different
Brief.
organization, so I'll keep it brief. Just on the concept of, I was appreciative and always am when I see elected officials be careful with their tax dollars. And when I saw that article this week about you being willing to relook at expenditure of a building, that maybe we can, be able to keep a larger building and make it usable and use that money. There's plenty of places that we can improve our community and in our Parks and Recs program that if we can save and keep an existing building and make it function. I just wanted to express my gratitude for your willingness to relook at that and be open to, hey, maybe we make mistakes in the way we evaluate or look at things or the information we get the first go around. And I just wanted to say I respect that a lot, that you're looking at that and hope that if we can save the money, let's save it and use it somewhere else in our community. So thank you, Mayor, for my indulgence.
Thanks, Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
Hi, my name is John Word. I'm the owner of Soul Taxi here in town. I'm sure you guys have always seen our cars all over the place. My issue I have is how hard it is to actually hire any kind of staff for a taxi in Cedar. Bylaws are a tad too strict for us to hire anybody. We can't even train someone unless they're fully licensed. That costs about $200-300 per person if they even pass training. That means I've paid over $2,000 in the last week to hire 3 employees so far. People quitting and can't handle the actual process. Bylaws are too vague on any drug, violence, and theft charges in the last 5 years. That means whether you stole a car or stole a candy bar, it's the exact same thing for us hiring them. Same thing with drugs, either a high actual drug charge or a small misdemeanor pot charge. We can't hire them. To me, it's a tad little strict, especially when we do everything we can to be the safety of our customers in town. We do about 4,000 to 5,000 people each month. A lot of numbers, and with small staff, it's getting really hard to keep maintaining, taking care of Cedar the way we do. We help out the sheriff's station, the hospitals, the Beehive homes. We do a lot in the community. And it's harder and harder for us to keep expanding and help out like we have been when you can't find anybody to even try to hire. Financially, or the staff just to run the business alone is getting a little too hard to actually handle. I've been talking with people in City Hall lately about this. They understand exactly what I'm trying to tell them. So I'm hoping you guys can maybe take a look at the bylaws on making it a little easier for us to hire somebody. I get taking care of the customers, trust me, making sure they're safe. But we do have cameras in our vehicles. We have GPS trackers. We do everything possible to keep in contact with the employees and customer at all times. Safety is our number one concern. We've had no complaints in the 2 years now of anything for violent, any kind of people feeling like they're in danger of the car. We do a lot to make sure of this. For me, it's not quite fair for us to have this kind of our hands tied on hiring when other jobs in town don't require that at all for any of their employees. So for me, I think we should take a look at the bylaws again, and maybe do a little different kind of how we word it. Smaller crimes maybe aren't as big a deal as the big ones are, clearly, That's my, I guess, main grievance for business in town.
Can you tell me, I'm so sorry, maybe it's just my ears, but one more time your name.
John Word.
Okay, and the taxi company.
Soul Taxi.
Soul Taxi,
Yes.
Okay. Can you tell me, just out of clarity, when you're able to find people that do work for you, what are they paid? Is it an hourly wage they're paid, or
Commission rate?
Commission rate.
Yeah.
Okay.
My average drivers make $400 or $500 a week, roughly on average, plus our tips.
Gotcha.
So pay is pretty good, but we're getting so busy and we can't keep up with the demand the town has for us because
Sure.
I can't find staff even.
Right.
Recently, I had a driver I wasn't aware wasn't actually fully licensed. Been me for a couple months. He got pulled over, had a warrant for unpaid fines. Arrested him, got my car impounded illegally. After I talked to the sheriff's station, they said it was wrongly impounded. Paid the fee, whatever. But I've had that guy for multiple months, and again, no complaints ever about anything, people being in danger in our vehicles. Like, we take every precaution possible to make sure we take care of everyone in town.
Sure.
I'm from the smallest in town to the biggest in less than 2 years for that reason. So for us to keep maintaining us taking care of the city, it's getting too hard. Not everyone wants to drive a taxi, clearly. And the ones that do usually have something in the background that wasn't exactly 100% positive, but I believe in giving second chances to them. And it's kind of hard when I'm not able to hire who I feel will be a good job for the business, actually.
Tyler, is there anything we can do to help this situation at all?
So right now, the qualifications don't allow a driver who's committed theft or been convicted of a drug charge in the last 5 years.
That
council has the ability to lighten those restrictions or eliminate them altogether. Whatever the council sees fit.
Not take off altogether. Clearly need some protection, but the clarification, like I said, a candy bar versus a car are not the same. You get for us hiring them, it's the exact same for us to be able to hire them or not. I mean, there should be a little more of a tiers versus how long ago I can hire somebody,
So we revised this ordinance probably within the last 7 or 8 years. I think Mr. Adams and Mr. Cousins were on the council last time we looked at it. I don't think the rest of the council was here, so it was a different council. The problem with doing tiers and looking at what was stolen is we don't know.
Well,
All
for
we
us,
see is
we have the high insurance we pay to take care of any and all possible things that happen. Plus, we have cameras in the cars for everyone's safety too. So we take every precaution possible. And theft, in my opinion, is mostly on me. They do handle my cash all day, so I'm the one with the risk, not really the customers in the back seat. So for me, it's not exactly a risk to the customers, more it is me, and I'm willing to give them a chance to try. I feel like I shouldn't be handcuffed down and say no when if it was 2 years ago, they're trying to move on, they're trying to better their lives, and getting told no, I'm not going to hire because well, you had a lapse of judgment previously.
What is the regulations for like a Lyft and Uber driver?
They don't have to follow any of that for some reason.
So that seems like that's an unfair advantage to your company.
It's not really for us any competition in town because we're number one. Luckily, everyone loves us that much. But no, they have zero at all of following this. A taxi for hire dictates anybody who gets paid to drive a car, the customer in the car, and get paid for it. Lyft does not have any kind of cash being handled around, nor does Uber. So they are technically they can go around the rule because there's no money actually being handled in the vehicle. So again, we do.
I'm not familiar with Lyft and Uber. I've never taken one. But doesn't the company itself have qualifications on who they allow to work for them?
I actually looked into it. All you require is a car that's no older than 10 years to drive for them. So no, not really at all. I actually do require drug tests. I require a lot. If you look online, you see we're hiring constantly because if I feel like you're not safe in town, I get ready immediately. Our number one thing is safety, period.
So Lyft and Uber, they don't do drug testing?
They have nothing to
require anything but
it took
a
me
car
5
that's
minutes to
never
sign
10
up for it. That was all it took. A picture of your VIN number and proof of your car. That's all.
Well, and you don't have a lot of competition right now, but 7 or 8 years that could all change. I mean,
Of course.
I've seen the taxi things change a great deal in the last 4 to 5 years in this community.
Right.
So the same thing could be happening. So it seems to me that we ought to be looking at some way to maybe 7 or 8 years ago, that was the right thing. Maybe we need to look at seeing if there's something, but I don't know. So
I'm going to say, would this council like John and Tyler to work
least-
to get to look
I
at
think
it
so, to
and
at least
work
look at it
together
and
s-
talked about it,
Get some
yeah.
of your feedback and what's going on, and then
I would.
at the beginning of the year we can. I mean, somewhere around there we
certainly
can.
don't think there's anything wrong with exploring it and see what we can find out. There may not be any room, but there may be, and we ought to look at that. Yeah.
That says a lot to me. So I mean,
Can you get Tyler your contact information? Oh, never mind. Perfect. Then we'll work with you and kind of look through it and get some of your feedback, and we can go from there.
I'm
If
happy
there's
to
other
bring-
taxi providers as well that may have some
Yeah.
input, we'd like to hear from the industry so we're getting the best knowledge possible.
There are currently 2 of us in Cedar. There's Iron
Okay.
County and Seoul.
Okay.
There were 5 and 6 last year, all but us and Iron County is shut down.
Well, maybe they did because they couldn't find employees.
It is part of it. Sadly, it really is.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much.
Yes.
All right. Are there any other public comments? No? Okay. Then we will move on with our business agenda with our staff portion with item number 4, consider the 2019 meeting schedule. You good?
I thought it looks fine.
I don't recall the schedule from this year, but my assumption is that, never mind, it's in 2019. We are meeting on January 2nd. That was my question. Yeah. No, yeah, it was in the
Yeah,
packet.
good job.
I have no problem with it. I looked at it today.
And when we get into,
There is, we'll
just
make an
like
adjustment, right?
always, when we get into the year, if something comes up, we can make the necessary change. So are you good with this going on the consent?
You don't want to meet on Christmas Day? Really?
Hey. No, actually, I don't. Okay. And Tom's not even here to let him know that. No. All right. Item number 5, consider bill payment schedule. Ian.
My name is Rian Carlson, Mayor, Council members. I didn't have this ready for Renan when she let you guys have the packet, but I think that she added it. Just, yeah.
Oh, I didn't see it.
So I'm not going to go over every detail, but I think it's beneficial to change the accounts payable schedule so that it's every other week, to be more consistent for the vendors and the department heads so that they know. I mean, you've got 1 week when you don't submit your bills, and you've got the next week when you do submit them. And there's a lot of times that utility bills or insurance payments, those sorts of things, we get them and they're due. And so we're always behind. And so if we have a little bit closer schedule, then it's going to make it easier to get those bills out in a timely fashion. Also, there's some vendors that have large amounts of money that are being paid out. And so if the departments aren't getting them in on time, they're waiting 2 weeks to get paid. Or sometimes there's 3 weeks and 4 weeks before we do a check run. And I just feel that they would appreciate us changing our schedule to every other week. It means that they're going to have to be ratified. So we will send out the checks, and then they would be ratified the next meeting, action meeting. But Renan has always sent them out in the past. You have a chance to look at them, and if there's any questions or concerns, we can always hold back a check until, or you can ask questions or whatever before we send it out.
Yeah, that was my question, because we do ratify that bill payment schedule, and we need to make sure that if there are any questions, that we have an opportunity to stop it.
Right, exactly.
Even on the weeks that we send them out before the action meeting, we would still send you that schedule.
Yes.
Right.
Via email. So
Okay, that was my question, that we would still be able to see them.
If you look at it and you have a question, you can call Jason and or Rian.
Yeah.
Anybody else.
But like last year, there was 8 times that we either ratified or had to do a special check. And with this schedule that I gave you, there'd be 10 times. But I really think that it would be beneficial to the vendors as well as the departments that submit the invoices.
How does it change your work in your world?
I mean, those 3 weeks, I've got that 1 week that I can get caught up on different things, but then you've got 140 checks. And so really, I don't think it's going to make that much difference.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, seems like a logical solution to me.
So are we good with this on the consent?
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, item number 6, consider road dedication for 1600 South, which will be used to access the VA cemetery. Tyler, go.
So as the council may recall, earlier this year, the city sold a piece of property to the VA so they could install a cemetery. As part of that property contract, the city agreed to install a road that would access that cemetery. So this has gone through the engineers department to outline exactly where this road would be located.
So it's pretty much following that existing road. We already have utilities in that existing roads, and so that kind of dictates where the road's going to be. And the VA cemetery was laid out so that it accommodated that road going by it with our existing utilities. How wide would this road be, Kit?
It'll be a 66 foot wide road, major collector.
No.
Questions, comments? Getting one step closer.
Yeah.
Okay, we good with this on the consent?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, item number 7, consider worker compensation agreement with worker compensation fund.
So currently the city's workers' comp insurance costs us about $187,000 a year. It has liability cat or maximums of 100,000 and 500,000 and 100,000. We have went through IRMA, which is our liability provider. They went through a third-party broker to bid out workers' comp insurance for all of their members. The current provider was given an opportunity to bid but declined. The best bid they got back, I think the only bid they got back, and the best one was from Workers' Compensation Fund. For Cedar City, that would mean a yearly rate of $142,300, and our policy limits would go up to $1 million, $1 million, and $1 million. Both companies provide opportunities for training and customer service, claim service, and things like that. The broker aspect of this through Morton, they've told us they would have more customer training and more workplace training available for us. Some of it's online, some of it's live. They do training on everything from trenching and shoring to vehicles to everything in between to help make a safer workplace and hopefully reduce those premiums even further. So the request is to move over to workers' compensation fund.
Paul, do they do dividend payments? Have we used
the credits, right?
Yeah, because I like work comp because they give us a dividend check often, and so it saves you quite a bit.
When they were given the IRMA board in the pitch, they said they can never guarantee that they're going to do dividends, but they've done a dividend. It sticks out in my head each of the last 17 years.
They have, and they're generally substantial. So I don't know what it'd be like for a city.
I think we'd be in the same ballpark with everybody else.
Do I understand that the current provider, it was like 500,000 for employee disease issue, and now it's dropped down to 100,000? Have we had many cases where that's an issue? I mean, is that a concern?
Most of our coverage kicks in for workplace injury.
Yeah.
Disease, I'm thinking mostly they're looking at bloodborne pathogens with the type of business we do.
Mm-hmm.
We have a pretty good program in place to protect against that. We just got audited on that, as a matter of fact, and I think we're in pretty good shape. We don't trigger that coverage a lot. Most of the time it's physical.
I didn't think so. I just was wondering. And then my other question on this was, is there a reason that the other company didn't want to bid? I mean, weren't we due for our credit next year?
So the credit that we have with our current plan would have kicked in our renewals in 2019, which would have been in July.
Mm-hmm.
And it would have given us a $17,000 credit off that $186,000 premium.
But still, our savings on the other one is
About
far outweighs that.
$25,000.
Yeah.
So
is this negotiated every year?
The premium is reassessed on a yearly basis.
I see.
Whether or not we leave the provider, we've been with the same provider for many years. I can't tell you how many years, but we've been with the same provider for quite a while.
Yeah.
But yeah, they'll reassess us. And the biggest thing they reassess is our injury rate over the last 3 years. How many people get hurt, and not just the amount of injuries, but the extent and the cost.
Mm-hmm.
For example, this year, we have a lot of small injuries, but nothing really costly.
Mm-hmm.
So we got to reduce those small injuries and stay away from the big ones.
Safety first. I think
Are there any additional questions, comments? You good with this going on the consent?
Yeah.
Okay. Item number 8, presentation on the wastewater treatment plant effluent reuse study.
machines aren't working. Yeah. I mean, we have to do something.
Gonna kick us off?
Yeah. Just state your name and then you're good to go.
Sure, great. I'm John Rearing with Corollo Engineers. With me is Corey Dow, also of Corollo Engineers. We're here to give you a briefing on the effluent reuse feasibility study, and then also to answer your questions and also take any public comment at the council's pleasure. So with that, we'll launch into it. The quick agenda we've got for you is give you a quick project background, talk to you about the alternatives that we were asked to evaluate, brief you on the criteria that were used to evaluate those alternatives, and then show you the results of that alternatives analysis, take any input and questions that you may have on that as well, if you're open to it, provide an opportunity for public input, and then talk about next steps and where we go from here. First, I'll talk about project background. The overview of the project is essentially to take a look at this water resource that we've got available to us through reclaimed water from the city's wastewater treatment facility, along with project partners with our neighboring communities, and really take a look at which alternative makes the best use of reclaimed water, which right now is arguably an underutilized water resource here in the valley. Overview of our scope of work was then to analyze and select from 6 alternatives that were laid out by the city, and I believe the council had input into those alternatives that we were asked to take a look at. Corey will walk through what those alternatives were to refresh you on those. Evaluate those alternatives based on economic and non-economic criteria. We'll talk to you about what those criteria were. As a separate part, and it's grayed out here because we're not going to focus on it here this evening, but as a part of this effort, we also were asked to research and summarize potential sources of funding that could help us either with funding the study itself or potentially the implementation of the selected alternative. And so that's going on a parallel path as well. So if you've got questions on that, we'd be happy to answer those, but we're not going to talk about that as part of our presentation here this evening. So with that, I'll ask Corey to talk to you about what the 6 alternatives were that we evaluated.
Thanks, Sean. So we're going to dig into a little bit more detail here on what we looked at. So this is just a list of everything that we did look at. On the left hand, we'll summarize the primary type of reuse that the alternative was. And then the list on the right is just summarizing what that was. So again, to recap, alternative 1 was kind of our do nothing approach, continuing as is. Alternative 2 was to move an agricultural operation closer to the wastewater facility and use that water on the current land application site. Alternative 3 was to provide the treated wastewater to an existing area south of the plant. And that gets kind of broken up into 2 different alternatives that I'll get in more detail here in a second. Alternative 4 was to utilize the reclaimed water to expand the existing secondary system for landscape irrigation and then store the water near the Fiddler's Canyon. Alternative 5 was to build a storage reservoir near the Enoch Graben and then utilize that water for existing agricultural operations in the vicinity. And then the 6th alternative was to look at a decentralized approach, meaning construct a smaller packaged facility that would be used for groundwater recharge that could be a year-round benefit. So kind of some guiding principles as we looked at these. So maximizing the amount of reclaimed water you can reuse is basically using it year-round. So that means one of 2 things. You either have a storage reservoir to store that water during the winter, because irrigation is a seasonal thing, or you treat that water to a higher standard and then inject that back into the groundwater during the winter months so that you're getting some kind of benefit year round, right? So if you're storing winter flows, that requires a very large volume that needs to be placed somewhere. And that ended up being close to 3,000 acre feet that you'd have to store somewhere. So doing simple math to put that in perspective, that's a 300 acre reservoir 10 feet deep approximately. So it's not a cheap structure. But then if you look at ways of how you could recharge the aquifer, that requires some highly advanced treatment technologies so that your groundwater supply is protected. Okay, so we'll dig into a little bit more details here. So what this table summarizes here are the major components for each alternatives. You'll notice that there's essentially either winter storage that's included, or there is aquifer recharge, which then requires some advanced treatment. And then most of the alternatives require some kind of pump station and conveyance infrastructure, except for the decentralized approach. So looking at this aerial here, this summarizes alternative 2. Down here near the south end of the picture is where the wastewater facility is located. This kind of green box here represents a storage reservoir to store the winter water, again, in the amount of just under 3,000 acre feet. And it's also where a pump station would be placed. Additional piping and conveyance would be put in to utilize that water for existing pivots. We even, and again, mind you, this is all conceptual. This is by no means to represent a design. Another option to use the excess water, we looked at some pivots nearby where you could potentially pipe the water to. So this kind of gives you a graphic representation of what alternative 2 is. So it should be noted that an existing operation in the city somewhere would move to this site, and the city would pay to set up shop and get them going to utilize this water. So alternative 3, so we broke alternative 3 into 3A and 3B. 3A is quite similar to alternative 2, except for we're not bringing an operation near the wastewater plant. We're sending the water to an operation somewhere south. This is just a general area to represent the needed irrigation area. This by no means is specified as an exact location. That is something that would have to happen during implementation and figure out down the road. So again, you have a large storage reservoir near the wastewater facility, which would also include a pump station, and then you would pipe it to wherever it would be going to be used during irrigation months. Now, again, it should be noted that the city would need to have some form of agreement with that user that they would idle their water rights during the irrigation season and agree to use the reclaimed water so that you get that benefit of not withdrawing water from the aquifer. So 3B essentially is the same, except we're not storing that winter water. We're adding advanced treatment near the wastewater facility and then finding injection points into the aquifer. This would equate to roughly 20 recharge wells that would meet the build-out flow of the wastewater plant, which is 4.8 million gallons per day. And this would be the general needed irrigation area for the irrigation season, which came out to about 840 acres. So again, the difference between 3A and 3B is either storing that winter water in a large reservoir or adding advanced treatment to the wastewater facility to then recharge the aquifer. Alternative 4, again, is supplementing and expanding the existing secondary system. So there is a point down here to the south where we would tie in to the existing secondary system that would then feed the city's purposes for parks or other public landscapes. This kind of has a combination of a few things. So the location that was identified by the city to have a storage reservoir near Fiddler's Canyon, the known geotechnical conditions out there would be susceptible to rapid groundwater recharge. And it's not exactly a feasible site to line that location. So because of that, you would have to add advanced treatment at the wastewater facility anyway. So in that regard, for winter water, this water would be recharged into the aquifer, and any excess water that would come temporarily either in the winter months, because you do have secondary wells that feed that system, or in the winter, there would be a small reservoir built in that canyon. But again, because that water is expected to get sucked in the ground pretty quick, we had to assume advanced treatment for that requirement as well. So alternative 5 is quite similar to the others, except we don't have a storage facility near the wastewater plant. This introduces constructing a storage reservoir in the Enoch Graben for the same amount of water. So again, sorry about that. Quite a large reservoir. And then during the irrigation months, utilizing existing operations to use that water And again, the city would have to come to some kind of agreement with those users to use that water instead of their own water rights. So alternative 6.
Can I? Yep. So, but when we have the same problem there with the Enid Graben, where it recharges so easily that we'd have to treat that if we did try to build a reservoir there, or would you?
Sorry, yes, I failed to mention that. So this alternative does involve advanced. That's what the AWPF stands for, is Advanced Water Purification Facility. So you would be adding advanced technology here because of the expected geotechnical conditions in that reservoir. And again, they're existing canyons. It's not exactly feasible to go in there and try to line those to prevent seepage. So we had to be conservative in our assumptions and add the advanced treatment to protect groundwater quality.
I'm a little disappointed. We had a meeting, I can't remember how long ago, but the Division of Water Quality, was it where they come to city council? I can't remember if it was this or a district meeting, but they talked about how we could possibly bring the water up to a type 1, because we've got a type 2 water now coming out, right?
Yep.
And if we brought it up to a type 1 with a sand filter, then we could put that in a gravel pit and recharge. And they did say that in that meeting, but then it seems like they've backed away from that statement.
Yes, there's been a few other areas in the state of Utah that are entertaining this kind of approach of indirect potable reuse. And as they've looked at it further, they're kind of backing off that. And it's not to say exactly what the requirements are going to be, but what they can say is that the assumptions right now are pretty conservative. The regulations in terms of protecting groundwater quality are pretty strict. So we had to be conservative in our assumptions in that approach. Alternative 6 is a decentralized package plant, as well as advanced treatment to recharge the aquifer. If you can see this little blue shaded area down here, this is just north of the airport. So the idea here is that you would mine directly off the existing sewer that's in 2300 north, or is it west? Sorry, west. Sorry, still getting used to the grid system. 2300 west. So you would pull off the existing sewer nearby, house an advanced treatment system on site here, and then also recharge the aquifer in that same location. So this would be sized for approximately 2 million gallons per day. And the benefit to this is that it would be a year-round benefit. So you're continually recharging the aquifer, but it does reduce the amount of flow going to the existing regional facility, as well as has a pretty significant cost for the advanced treatment, and you're not maximizing the build-out flow. So these were the things that we looked at in a bit more detail. And John's going to get into how we evaluated each of these and how we came to our conclusions.
So I have another comment and question. I brought this up in our last meeting. The thing I struggle with is where they've backed off from the type 1 water recharge. The thing that doesn't make sense to me is we put that effluent out in those fields by the sewer plant now, and I think the water depth is about 10 feet, the water table. Isn't it, Kid? About 10 or 15, 20, whatever. But it's pretty shallow as it is, and we're putting type 2 water out there, and obviously that's recharging pretty quick into that aquifer. And we there was a time that the nitrates got quite high, so they had us build the nitrate plant, which has brought that under control. But it just disappoints me that we can't bring it up to a type 1 and recharge in a pit or something, because it seems like that would be far above what we're doing now. You know what I mean? And so I don't know if we could press them on that at all, or if they'd look into that, or
there could be additional coordination. I don't know how far you would get with that.
It's just
part of the reason is where the wastewater facility is located. My understanding is that the hydrogeology kind of flows to the north here. So it's not exactly a drinking water location of the aquifer, even though the aquifer is all interconnected. It kind of flows that way. So your concern maybe in that area wouldn't be as high. Again, there would have to be some pretty extensive field testing to figure that out. But regardless of what the city decides to do moving forward, there'll have to be extensive additional coordination with the regulators to figure out what they want to do. So I'll hand this back over to John.
Thank you. Yeah, just to add to that, I think it's fair to say there's a significant amount of regulatory uncertainty about the intentional recharge of a drinking water source with reclaimed water is not being practiced in Utah now. That's a growing trend in the United States now to do that intentionally for indirect potable reuse, which is where we augment intentionally a drinking water source with reclaimed water, whether that's surface water or groundwater. Excuse me, not being practiced in Utah right now, is being practiced in other parts of the United States. And so that regulatory precedent is growing, but it's not in place here in the state now.
So
And
they are doing it in other states?
In other states, yes.
With like a type 1 water? No? It's treated?
The requirements vary by state, and it is state by state. And so what the Utah regulators would require, I think, is a big question mark until it really does get pushed along by communities that start to implement it. So at this point, I think it's fair to say we just don't know really what those regs would look like. We can compare what other states are doing and maybe, do some hypotheticals, but until it gets pushed a little further along in the state, we don't know. At this point, we've taken a conservative approach for purposes of planning this study to say, if we did direct injection, here's what the treatment requirements would be, which means they'd have to match the groundwater quality standards in situ. But certainly, as Corey pointed out, another level of refinement then as you went to implementation would be to work with the regulators and do some soil column testing to look at how much treatment do we really get between at the point at which you apply it to the ground and the point that it reaches the saturated zone of the aquifer, and then work with the regulators to demonstrate how much treatment you're getting and how much credit they'll give you for that demonstrated treatment, so that you can reliably get that treatment and then reduce the amount of treatment that you have to do above ground and take credit for what's happening between where you apply it and where it actually reaches the saturated part of the aquifer. So excellent points. At this point, we don't have enough information to say reliably one way or the other how that would shake out. Thank you. Okay, let's talk about evaluation criteria then. This is a regional study. We do have partners with Cedar City, with the district, and with the county. So there's been a core planning team that's been meeting with us to help kind of guide the planning so far. And it's a pretty quick turn study. We started back in September, October timeframe, and we're being asked to wrap this up by the end of December, which means we're going to be back visiting with you a couple times in December. So there are meetings, Ms. Mayor, that you'll be seeing us again at.
See, I was trying to expedite you coming back sooner by having it be December.
Fair enough. With that, though, as part of our scope and the development of our scope, the city did specify some very specific things that we were asked to evaluate the different alternatives on. And so the criteria and performance measures that each of those alternatives were evaluated against are listed here. There's actually 2 slides because it was too much to fit on one page here without being an eye test for you. The major criteria are listed in the dark bars, and then the minor criteria or performance measures are listed in the bullets there. So the major criteria are cost, that's the economic criteria, and then there's a series of non-economic criteria that we also evaluated all of the different alternatives against. Water supply benefit, community benefit, and social acceptability are 2 of the other ones. But you can see the ways that we've measured these: capital costs, operations, maintenance, and replacement costs, life cycle costs, which is kind of a combination of those. But then other softer side of those as well, like the potential for outside funding, and we're looking into that. We have a good sense of that from other parts of the country, what is attractive to state and federal agencies for funding through grants or low-cost loans. Or the potential to defer costs. Do we have to bite off the whole apple all at once, or can we phase these in over time? So those are ways that we measured cost and compared the alternatives on cost. Water supply benefit, this is arguably one of the main reasons that we're looking at this as a potential project. So you can see the different ways that we measured that. And then community benefit and social acceptability is also key to implementing a project. Public acceptability, improvement to targeted areas of the groundwater table, and human contact with reclaimed water. The 2 other major criteria were implementability and permitting. You can see there were several different ways that we measured that and compared the alternatives. against that major criterion, and operability, getting to, if we really had to do this, especially with respect to some of the advanced treatment that's part of some of these alternatives, how practical is that for plant staff and operations staff to do this? Is it a horribly complex treatment plant, or in the case of alternative 6, 2 treatment plants that we'd have to operate? Are the operators familiar with it? Is it nationally proven technology? These are all things that went into comparing the alternatives against one another. And so we've got a big matrix that compares these alternatives to one another against all of these. Now we know that when we compare the alternatives and we think about these criteria, they're not all equally important to one another. And that's going to vary from person to person within any group. And so the planning team, we asked the core planning team that's been meeting with us to help guide us on how important these are relative to one another. And we used what we call a paired comparison method, where we pit each one of these major criteria, the dark blue bars, those 5 different dark blue bars, against one another, and asked them to say, if you had to choose one or the other, and I know, maybe cost is a good one. If you had to say, if you had to choose cost or water supply benefit, which is more important to you? And we went through each possible combination of these to come up with the relative weighting, the relative importance of each of these 5 major criteria, and asked that planning team to help us then understand what's most important when we compare these, because it's not 20% of the total value on each one of these. Some are going to be more important than others, and it's difficult decisions because we want it all. But if we had to make some tough decisions and we had to prioritize based on some of these being more important than others, how are we going to make these decisions? And again, it's difficult decisions. But we did that with the core planning team that included folks from the city, from Enoch, from the district, from the county. And we asked them then to weight those using that paired comparison method. And if you took 100 points then and used that method to divvy up those 100 points against those 5 different criteria, here's the average weighting that we got back from that group. And what it told us was that the most important things are water supply benefit. Again, arguably, that's kind of the main reason that we're looking at this, is that we see this as a water supply resource that we could tap and should be looking at tapping. And so water supply benefit was, by that group's measure, the most important of these criteria, followed by cost, and we need to do this cost effectively, and operability. Community benefit and social acceptability was also noted as being important. Implementability and permitting also showed some importance. But water supply benefit and cost and operability were the top 3 of those 5 as we look at how we make the decisions about which of these we should choose. So we then take those and we put them together to come up with the ranking of the alternatives. We've got the kind of the raw scores. How do each of those alternatives compare against each of those different criteria and all those different performance measures, the bullets on that blue bar chart that I showed you? And that's just kind of the facts. How do they do independent of what's important and what's not important? And then we apply those weightings to come up with the ranking of the alternatives. So each of the alternatives were evaluated against each of those criteria. We then apply those weightings, and the alternatives that score best against the most important criteria are the ones that are going to rank the highest. And so that's what we did. And the results come back to us in kind of a stacked bar chart format like this. So what scores well against an important criteria is going to get a large bar chart. And so the weighted decision score is kind of a unitless number, but again, what it shows you is the things that scored well against the most important criteria. And so you can kind of see the results of that, like water supply benefit, that's the red part of the bar there. Remember, that was the most important criterion. Cost was another pretty important criterion. Operability was another pretty important criterion. So you can see that's contributing the most to that weighted decision score. And you can see then not only what scored the best, but why it scored the best and for what reasons it scored. So maybe start with an easy one, no action. We intentionally included that, and at the city's direction included that, but it's good to include that to understand maybe why we do or don't want to continue doing what we're doing now. And so we can take a look at that and say, why did that do well or not do well? Well, it actually wasn't the worst ranked alternative, but it wasn't the best either. Where did it do poorly? Well, it did poorly against water supply benefit, because we're not recharging the aquifer. We're not preventing any additional groundwater withdrawals with that. And so you can see for the water supply benefit, the red bar, it didn't get any score for that, right? In contrast, though, it did really well. The yellow bar did really well for cost, because we're not spending much to do that, right? Versus we're spending money on all of the other ones to do something with that. So it did great on cost, but it did horrible on water supply benefit. So that kind of makes sense, right? And so we repeated that process. And so the stack bar is just an addition of how well did it do against those criteria and how important was that criterion. And so what the results of this show us is that alternative 2, for the criteria that we laid out there and for the importance of the criteria that our planning core team guided us on, alternative 2 really best met the important criteria and the most important criteria the best relative to all the others that we were asked to evaluate. And you can see kind of the reasons that it did well. Alternative 6, that satellite treatment facility, granted it was only 2 MGD instead of the full 4.8 build out MGD of the plant, the main plant. It didn't do as well on water supply benefit because it's not providing as many acre feet of supply to us. And so you can see it didn't do as well on water supply benefit. And for that reason, it was the lowest scoring alternatives. So this kind of guides us on maybe some screening, at least gives us some direction on that. When we look back on that, though, we also saw that there were some really high costs. The capital costs, if we zero in on that, were alarmingly high for these. And if you look at that, the capital costs, the scale on the left there is not a typo. That is the actual capital costs that were associated with these different alternatives. Tens, and in some cases, many cases, over $100 million to implement these alternatives. That's a tremendous amount of money, and it frankly surprised me as to how high those costs were. But what are the drivers behind those? How come those costs are so high? In Alternatives 2's case, not only was the highest ranked alternative, but also was the most expensive alternative. So it did well for other reasons besides capital costs. In that case, we're buying land at the city's direction. We were asked to include the purchase cost of land for those that would be relocated up to the city's property to start their or move their operation up there and relocate some of the equipment and so forth. So there's quite a bit of land purchase cost in there. That's the green bar. There's also some storage costs, that darkest blue bar, kind of black looking bar. That's storage costs for those where we're storing wintertime water or off-peak non-irrigation season water. That's 4.8 MGD, million gallons per day of water over 7 months or so of the year. So storing 3,000 acre feet of water, that storage cost is high. That's a big chunk of money to store that much water. An acre foot of water, just to give you some perspective, an acre foot is an acre of land 1 foot deep, or an acre, just to give you some perspective, an acre is about the size of a football field. So that's a football field 1 foot deep, but 3,000 of those. So you can see that. And then advanced treatment costs are for alternatives 3B through 6. Those are the major driver for the cost there. So those are some extremely high costs. And to some degree, you might think that the practicality of implementing these then becomes limited. So when we took this back to our planning group, they had the same feedback that we did when we put these together, which is, kind of makes you wrinkle your forehead a little bit and say, is that practical to implement that? Or is there a better way maybe to do that, or a different way to implement these? So this was the first group of alternatives in the group that we were asked to evaluate. We're not showing no action here, but the cost is essentially zero. So the winter storage or the treatment and recharge drives the capital costs and drives them very high for most of these alternatives. So with that, the planning team, when we met last week, suggested that we take a look at 2 revised alternatives that would help us reduce the capital costs. And those are the same as alternatives 2 and 5, but they would, instead of doing year-round reuse, where we store or recharge the water in the wintertime, we would not do winter storage. We would have a smaller irrigation area, and we would not use as much reclaimed water. So essentially, we'd be directly using the water in the summertime and not using it in the non-irrigation periods. So we cleverly named them alternatives 2R for revised, where same thing, we move an ag operation up to near the wastewater treatment facility, but we don't have the storage and we don't have as much irrigation area. And alternative 5R, same thing, agricultural irrigation in the Enoch Graben area, but we don't have that storage reservoir, so we don't have the cost of that incurred, and it's not as much land area that we need to apply it to. And so what we've got here is shown in the kind of the balance beam there, is we've got a trade-off between the amount of water that we're beneficially reusing. It's about 2,000 acre feet per year instead of 5,400, which is the full 4.8 MGD build-out capacity of the plant. But the cost side of that is we're now in the range of 17 to 29 million instead of over $100 million to implement these.
So does that include building the cost of, you say if we just use the water for the ag users during the growing season, we still have to have a small reservoir to, we can.
No, we got rid of the reservoir and we got rid of the treatment as well.
Right. You can just put type 2 water right on the alfalfa.
That's right.
Okay. And that was how much? Just to do it in the growing 20?
So alternative 5 in this case is $17 million. It includes the pump station, the piping, to get it out there essentially.
So I have a question for Steve Platt. So if we did that alternative, is the belt route going to go through? I guess we're still deciding that or voting on it, right?
Still deciding that.
But that'd be something to consider, right? For piping and things like that, to get it underneath before you build a highway.
You don't want to put a highway through a swamp.
Right.
No.
Well, or put the pipe in before. I mean, if they use up the water, you hopefully won't have a swamp. But, okay.
Thank you.
Sorry.
No, that's why we're here. So we take that same chart then and we add in alternatives 2R and 5R. You can see where they then fit in. So none of the other bars changed at all, but we add in the same information for those 2 new alternatives, and they're highlighted in blue text, so you can kind of see where they then squeeze in. And they did fairly well relative to the others, but they didn't knock out the number 1 alternative, which was I shouldn't call it the top ranked alternative, which was alternative 2.
Well,
but they did pretty well.
2R's water supply benefit dropped quite a bit, but obviously.
Yeah. So nice segue to my next click. Thank you. So what is that trade-off? Absolutely, the water supply benefit in both cases. You can see with the arrows, the score did not as well because we're using about 2,000 acre feet per year. It's just that summertime supply, or this is really not the supply, but the summertime demand for driven by that peak month of alfalfa demand. So that reduces the benefit that we get out of the water. But it also increases the score on the cost, which means the costs go down. So the cost score goes up. We get a better score for that. And you see the trade-off that we get there. One could argue, though, that even if it's not the top ranked alternative, and those scores are really pretty close, so I wouldn't read too much into that. As you know, the difference between the scores, the decision score there for 2R, 3A, and 5R, or any of those in that group there, I wouldn't read too much into that. But one could argue that the feasibility of implementing any of those at that 17 to $29 million range is much better than something that's over $100 million. Oh, my computer is now being controlled by Caden. That's not good, but it took away my clicker. Are you able to click me? Good.
So exactly.
Have I been hacked? Great. So conclusions, the takeaways that Corey and I have from this is that alternative 2 arguably best satisfies the most important criteria identified by the planning team, but that year-round management of reclaimed water, which then requires something to do with a lot of storage or some pretty expensive treatment to allow you to recharge the groundwater, it may make the cost infeasible. And there really is a cost-benefit trade-off with seasonal-only reuse, and you just saw the kind of the evidence of that. If nothing else, seasonal reuse could then be the first phase of an ultimate year-round reuse program. And so even if we want to get to that year-round reuse, this seasonal approach with the 2R or 5R alternatives that I just showed you could be the first kind of step towards getting there, and something that could be more feasible to implement in the near term, even if that's a place you want to go to year-round eventually. That might be too much to bite off right now. And you could take this first step as a step towards that longer term goal.
So those numbers, did that include buying the water rights that farmer would idle or not?
So nothing that I've shown you here right now includes buying the water rights. And I think that's an open question for further discussion, or maybe as part of implementation, as to whether we really would need to buy the water rights. And that's been a discussion that the group, as you know, has had as to whether we would need to buy those water rights, with the goal of making sure that they don't get used for something else.
Could you, I mean, Kit, could you have those ag folks pull their pumps and weld a cap on their pipe and, I mean, just ensure they don't ever use that water if we made this agreement? Would that be enough, or do you feel like we'd have to buy their water rights just to make sure?
Well, I think if there's a benefit to buying the water rights, we'd end up with a valuable resource in the future if we had those water rights.
That's true.
So there's different ways we could do that. One is buying the water rights. Another is, physical and legal approaches to doing that. The cost of buying the water rights at the city provided us with a current evaluation of the value at $3,500 an acre foot for water rights in the northern portion of the basin where we'd be looking. The cost of buying the water rights at the full 4.8 MGD, the 5,400 acre feet per year level, that's about $19 million value. If we were only looking at the 2,000 acre feet, it's more like $7 or $8 million worth of purchasing the water rights. So that's kind of the dollar value. And I think the open question is whether that's something you'd need to do in order to prevent them from using those water rights in some other way, or if there are physical and legal ways of preventing that outside of buying those water rights. And that's an open question, I think, that hasn't been
The
resolved.
state's also going to weigh into that. Are you going to put those water rights in non-use? They expect you to use your water rights.
Sure. And so I think the hope overall for the city is that, well, there's a number of different ways that could go, but certainly there's benefit to resting those water rights. Those also could be turned over to the city for the city's longer term use.
I wonder if the legislature would entertain a bill to, I mean, this is new territory, but if somebody idles their water for this, to use affluent water, that they might work with them on that too. I would imagine they would.
Sure. That's all we had for you for a presentation. Happy to entertain further questions, and then at the council's pleasure, also entertain public comment or questions.
I guess a couple points with the moving the ag out to the wastewater treatment plant, closer to it. I know Kit said the Clarks have had success growing hay there. I know, but on the other hand, Brent Hunter, who's the chairman of our water board district, the Central Iron County Water Conservancy District Board, has said he's had a hard time growing hay out there because it's colder and it's got a lot of alkali in the soil. So I don't, that's something to think about too. So.
And we have heard that input, right? So understood.
Are there any additional comments, questions from the council?
So so the reverse osmosis, that increases the cost a ton, doesn't it? I mean, when you start trying to store it or recharge it, it just really makes it expensive.
It does, both in terms of capital costs and operational costs. And part of that is disposing of the brine that's generated, the brine waste stream that's generated as part of running the RO.
How do you dispose of that? landfill? I mean, or is there special?
But so it's a liquid stream, and so what we've assumed for this purposes of this is a deep well injection.
But with the brine, how do you get rid of the brine that it creates?
So deep well injection, like 10,000 feet deep, well below drinking water aquifer.
Oh, I see.
Levels.
Oh, I'll let you do that.
That's been done in other states. Again, I don't know. There's a good precedent in
Interesting.
Utah, but
It's that or construct a large evaporation pond, essentially.
John, I have a question. This planning team that's been working on this, all the various entities you described earlier.
Yes, sir.
As you look at the cost, regardless of which plan you go with, how are we going to fund this project?
Sure, Council, that's an excellent question. So one of the things that we're now looking into is the availability and kind of the feasibility or practicality of state and federal grants. And there's no guarantees of any of that by any means. But we are looking into that and options for the city to look into for potentially applying for those. To some degree, that'll depend on which alternative is selected. But we're documenting the opportunities that are out there for the city's consideration for potential application.
Yeah.
They gave Jonathan and I a really good briefing about 2 weeks ago about some grant and loan funding opportunities. And I think our feedback at that time was, well, let's get through the proposal and see what the costs are and see if we have a direction on where we want to go, and then we'll pick up the funding.
Well, then my other question is too, because there's so many entities involved in this, does there need to be 100% agreement? Does Enoch City want something different than Cedar City wants? Does the county want something different than Enoch wants? You know, where do we go from there?
Usually.
Always.
Sorry, Mr. Dotson, I see you there in the back. She was just wondering, you know, how that would work.
You have to come up to the microphone.
That's part of the reason why we tried to involve everybody in the study area. So, okay, now we've studied it. Now we have an idea of what the costs are. Now we need to go back and see if there's a consensus, or are we on our own, or do we have partners in it? That's what we need to find out too.
Okay. Thank you.
We'll open it. Will you come up to the microphone and state your name and go through all of that for us?
My name is Steve Platt, and I'm the Iron County engineer. And Paul brought up an excellent question, and I misspoke. I said we don't want to put a pipe through a swamp. I meant to say we don't want to put a road through a swamp. Horops are doing the belt route alignment study for us, and these guys made an excellent presentation to you tonight. We are talking about the same area north of Enoch, and we don't want to put them both together. We've got to figure out where one's going to be before we can decide where the other one's going to be. So I think immediately in the next week or two, we've got to get Horrocks with these folks and let them each understand what's happening here, because it's going to have an implication on each of what they're going to present to us in about the end of the year.
Yeah. Good point.
Well, when they use, Steve, when they use all that water with their fields, I mean, have you guys run the numbers with the pivots that are out there? Would they use all of that up, or would it be a lot of excess water put on the ground? I mean, have you done the
talking about for the Enoch area?
Mm-hmm.
Will you come talk in the microphone?
East of Enoch, you know, the field just to the east of it.
Just assume we go with the $17 million option that says we'll just do
Under that option,
solely ag use, and it's
so
down by Enoch.
That's much more feasible in terms of the land area, because it's about 800 acres instead of 2,200 acres. So looking at existing what appears to be irrigated areas, that appears to be much more feasible. Okay. Finding 2,200 acres of irrigated area over there appeared to be a challenge.
And what size pipe would it take to take what do we have, about 3,800 feet right now coming out?
I don't recall the length off the top of my head, but the diameter for 4.8 MGD was 16-inch, I believe.
My point is, if we do that option, we just want to put that pipe in before we build a road, right, Steve? I mean, so, okay. Thank you.
Are there any other public comments, questions? No. Are there any other council questions?
It's been fascinating.
Thank you. So we did have just next steps. There was a slide on that kit, but there I can verbalize it as well, where we have it's the one with the little calendars down there on the bottom. So we do, as part of our work plan, have a draft report due to city staff next week. And then we're due to come back to you to talk about the draft report on December 12th. There's a work meeting on that evening. And then to ask you to adopt the final report a week later. This is all a very fast schedule. And it probably looks and sounds fast, and it is. But in order to meet our end of the year deadline and to also coordinate that with your council meeting schedules, that's what the schedule looks like. And so that's when we'll be back to talk to you about those final steps. So we'll take the feedback that we've got here tonight and wrap that into recommendations and an implementation plan, working with city staff then to do that.
I would just urge you that then to get with Mr. Platt and let's make sure that we get those two together ASAP.
Understood. That's good feedback. I'd like to thank you again, though, for the opportunity to do this work for you and for the great teamwork that's been shown by everyone involved. That's been made it very, very enjoyable for us to work on this project and appreciate the opportunity to do so. Thank you.
Now Rob decided he wanted to comment.
Now for the last word.
Councilwoman Lee is in the audience too, and if I didn't do something,
You
I
didn't
get
state your name
fired.
though.
I'm Rob Dotson,
Thank you.
City Manager of Phoenix City, and I appreciate the opportunity that you've given us as a partner in this conversation. It's really important that we understand the dilemmas and the challenges when it comes to the paying for, especially, that's primary, of course, paying for, but also the importance of the water issues here. I think there's a couple of things that I'd like to add. One is the groundwater management plan, which is quickly becoming close, and Councilman Paul Cousins is on that groundwater management plan committee with myself and a bunch of others. In that groundwater management plan, it did discuss also have a part to do with reuse, that water rights could be curtailed based upon the use of water from the treatment plant. That is in the draft. And so that may be something the state engineer can use legally to curtail water without having to actually purchase the water rights. That's another issue that comes into play. Also, I would like to say that most likely, as far as I know, though we haven't taken a vote, Phoenix City is on board with helping in any way we can to create financial way of paying for this as a partner, especially, well, only if Phoenix City gets some of the water. I should say that too. We know that 10% of the effluent that goes, well, what goes into the plant is from Phoenix City. We appreciate the contract we have with Cedar City to treat that water. We know we save plenty of time and money from having to do that ourselves. So we do appreciate that. And as a partner, we'd like to also participate in getting this water to Phoenix City area. We do know that we both, Phoenix City and Cedar City, pump from the same area and drink the water right now. All of you fine folks that live in Cedar City drink Phoenix City water. I hope you know that. That's why you're all so healthy and happy. Maybe. And so we just want you to know that we're willing to participate to the extent we can. So that's all I have to say.
Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, Rob. Right. Are there any other questions, comments? No? Thank you. We look forward to seeing you in a few short weeks.
We're good. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll move on to item number 9, discuss Bicentennial Park renovations.
I wanted to start out by thanking the mayor and staff and council for allowing me to put this back on the agenda to maybe discuss this. I believe I've found some more information that could shed light on this situation. If we go back to the minutes of, if I can find them here. If we go back to the minutes, where are they?
August
15th council meeting, Mr. Bittman said the good news is the lights are up and everything's great at the Fields of the Hills. Kit did a great job, and saved us $78,000. The bad news is we had the materials testers go down to Bicentennial Park, and they found that the footings and foundation of the existing building are not good. To finish that project, they need to raise the existing building, including digging out what's underneath it, and start from scratch, so we'll get a little more expensive. And that, I guess that little more expensive, added up to about $331,000. And when I saw this, that was a little bit of a sticker shock to me. I confess I did vote in August. We voted 5-0 to raise the building, tear it down. I based my decision that night on that information that the footings and foundation were bad or not good, I guess is the word you used, Paul. Kind of let it go at that point. And then all of a sudden in our November, what was our work meeting? November, was it 7th? 14th. The work meeting, 7th, you're right. So on November 7th, we had a work meeting. And honestly, and this is a point I want to bring up with staff, there was really, and I missed a couple meetings, so I might have missed something, but there was really not a lot of communication from the August meeting to the November meeting discussing this at all. It just seems like all of a sudden we had all these bids to replace the building. It was going to be torn down. And so I admit I should have done more due diligence back in August, but I went off that study or that statement that the existing foundation footings were bad. And so I sent Jonathan an email and said, hey, can I get some keys to that facility? I want to go look at it. And so I went out Monday morning, looked over myself first, and then I called Tim Watson from Watson Engineering Company to come look at it with me, and it just seemed I could not see any visible, structural damage with cracks or settling. So I asked Tim to come take a look at it with me, and he observed that and did a report. I hired him to do a report for me. And then I also, Clay Bullock, who owns Bedrock Foundation Solutions, came and looked at it with me as well. And he gave me the same evaluation. He said, and I took my laser out there and shot each corner, and it's got about 1.25 inches of elevation difference in the 4 corners. And I asked Clay about that, and he said, well, Paul, that was probably built that, I don't think it's moved at all. He said, I think it was probably built out that much when it was constructed. And so I had that. And then also I talked to Mr. Myers, who's here tonight from GEM Engineering, a little bit about this as well. And so I called Jonathan. I said, well, first of all, I asked him for the soils report, and I read that. And the only thing I could gather from the soils report, I was trying to figure out, how we determined that the foundation and footings were bad on the existing building. And so I read the soils report, and it said that they dug a 7-foot hole next to the building and tested the soil. And Joel, correct me if I'm wrong, but it said that they had moderate collapsible soils in that right there. And I don't think you dug under the footings or under the slab, but right there to the side of it. And so I called Jonathan and said, well, there's nothing in the soils report that would justify saying that the foundation and footings are bad. And he said, well, there's an email that came from GEM Engineering July 11th, and I had him send me that email, and it said that the footings and foundation needed to be replaced. But as you look at that email closer, the context of that email was based on information given that we were going to tear that building down. And the thing that's confusing to me is when, and probably bothers me, is it seems as if the decision to tear that building down was made far before it came to the August 15th meeting. And I looked up and I went back to the RAP tax. I had Renan look at the RAP tax meeting, board meeting minutes, and there was nothing. I didn't look at it myself, but Renan told me there was nothing in there that mentioned that building. So I went back to the minutes of find them here. Please bear with me.
Fine.
I went back to the meeting. It was the Leisure Service Advisory Board minutes, January 17th of this year, and It says in there in the public comments section, it was Brian. I don't know if that was. You think that was Brian Dangerfield? Ron? Was that Brian?
Probably.
He said we would take the $265,000 from the impact funds for the lights and installation at the fields at the hills, and then get the RAP tax money approved to use for renovating the bicentennial building. And so in that meeting, they talked about renovating the building, but somewhere between this meeting in January and July, somebody decided to tear it down. And the reason I think that was the case is because the soils report that came out on August 14th, that was dated the day before we had our August 15th meeting, the title of that report was the, what was the title of that report? It was, oh, you're right there. I'm sorry, I covered it up. It was the bicentennial restroom replacement. So I believe that the GEM engineering was told before we voted on it that we were going to tear the building down. And so I have a little bit of an issue with that happening, that decision was made before the council had an opportunity to vote on it. And so based on that information and the information, and I don't know if I need to read this report from Tim Watson. Maybe I will real quick. It just says, at your request, Watson Engineering Company met with you on site at the above referenced building at the Bicentennial Softball Parks to observe the condition of the existing structure. This structure was discussed at the November 14th City Council meeting, and the demolition and reconstruction of a new building were approved by the City Council. In addition to the visit, Watson has reviewed the City Council meeting minutes from August 14, 2018, and the geotechnical investigation report prepared by GEM Engineering dated August 14, 2018. The existing building, and that's incorrect because the minutes would have been from the August 15th meeting anyway, but the existing building is a two-story structure which is built out of concrete masonry unit, CMU block for the main level, and the upper level is wood framed. And then he's got some photos attached. During the site visit, both the exterior and interior portions of the building were observed to see if there were signs of foundation distress and or settlement. It is my understanding that this building was built about 40 years ago. And I've got another document I want to read that kind of talks about the age of that building. I observed several areas of cracking in the CMU block around the exterior of the building. See photos 3 and 4. I should have had these up on the screen. I apologize. Several of the cracks did not extend the entire length of the wall up to the transition between the block and wood framing. The foundation of the building was not observed due to the exterior grading and surrounding asphalt around the building. The transitions between the exterior concrete asphalt and the building's interior concrete slab were observed to see if there were differential elevations between the surfaces. One area that was observed was the existing restroom entrances on the south side of the building. The interior concrete slab of the men's restroom has significant elevation difference in the surface of the concrete slab as you enter the restroom. And when I had Clay Bullock out there, initially when I looked at the men's restroom, it looked like that had settled because it drops off so much. But when I had Clay out there, he pointed out to me that he said city staff back then poured the concrete and they just simply had a hump in the concrete. So it really didn't sink at all. There was just a kind of a hump in the middle, gave you that impression. The slab surface has been painted and it was difficult to see if a crack had been filled in at the breaking point of the elevation change. It was observed that 1/2 to 5/8 inch hole had been drilled through the CMU wall to the exterior to allow water to drain through the wall to help prevent puddling and surface moisture in the inside of the restroom. And then he goes on, he says, in my professional opinion, the existing Bicentennial Concessions building is structurally sound and that the observed cracking, the CMU exterior wall are not consistent with the signs typically seen in buildings that are experiencing foundation distress. The largest contributor to foundation settlement is excess moisture entering the soils adjacent to and under the building foundation. The drainage around the existing building should be reviewed and evaluated to see if changes are needed to provide positive drainage away from the structure's foundation. It was observed that the asphalt around the structure needs to be replaced and or repaired to help provide adequate unobstructed drainage of the surface moisture runoff away from the building's foundation. As mentioned above, the August 15th council minutes mention that the footings and foundation of the existing building are not good. Watson has not reviewed and did not observe a report or existing conditions during the site visit that concur with this statement. If a report does exist, please allow Watson to review the report and modify this evaluation report if needed. Also, a copy of the geotechnical investigation GEM report prepared by GEM Engineering was reviewed by Watson. According to the GEM report, the purpose of the report was 1, to evaluate the general nature and engineering properties of the subsurface soils at the site, and 2, provide recommendation and opinions regarding general site grading and the design and construction of the foundations, concrete slabs on grade, and asphaltic concrete pavements. This report was not prepared to evaluate the conditions of the existing foundation according to the stated purpose. If a new building is built, Watson agrees with the findings and recommendations stating in the GEM report for the construction of a new structure for the soil and foundation preparation. And I would agree with that if you did tear that building down, because it is a block foundation, that with the rebar stubbed through the block foundation into the block walls, you would do severe damage to that foundation and have to replace it anyway. So that'd be a no-brainer. The one thing about the age of the building that I did some research on, I spoke with a gentleman by the name of Glenn Spencer. He worked for the city, and he's the one that was in charge of building that building. He was in public, or not public, but Parks and Recreation for 31 years, he said. Did you remember?
I remember Glenn.
A very nice man. I had a nice visit with him. He sent me this email. I'll just read part of it. He said, I would say that the building is no older than 32 years. I looked at my 20 years of service with the Summer Games Appreciation Certificate, which was dated 2005. We built the complex for the Summer Games. I dug and poured the footings under the direction of the city engineers. The plans were drawn by Robert Mercer, an employee of Bullock Brothers Engineering. The plans called for footings on the exterior and interior walls to be below the frost line. The stem walls were mudded, grouted, and backfilled with compactable material. The block work was completed by Chamberlain and Wood. They also did the dugouts. And then he said the building was roofed by my staff. The building interior was completed by my staff. So the exterior of the building is block, as well as the interior walls are block as well. And the interior walls have a stem wall and a footing under those. And so we've got basically a gentleman named Clay Bullock, who's a professional. He installs piers. I asked him about the piers and if we needed those. He said, Paul, if this building hasn't moved in that amount of time, I don't think it's going to move. But he said if it ever did, it wouldn't take that much to come in after the fact and install some piers. And St. George News did an article, and Tracy Sullivan interviewed Clay. I didn't ask him about cost, but I think he's told her that it'd be between $6,000 and $10,000 to pier that building. I did talk to Joel. He thought that's probably a little low, so that's probably a little bit low there. But as I've talked to people around the community, especially sports enthusiasts that use that ball field a lot, they've just said, why are we tearing down a perfectly sound building when we could remodel it? Clay, when he was out there, said, I think and this all depends on how strict you get with the specs when you put it out to bid for a remodel. But he thought between $125,000 and $135,000 you could remodel that. And my hope that this council would do a motion to reconsider this, that would put it out to bid and see maybe it would cost too much. I don't know. I know the city can't find the plans for it. Maybe we can go to Robert Mercer and see if he's got the plans, and we look at how they're drawn, what kind of steel's in it, see if we're able to remodel that. But it just seems to me like it would be if we could remodel that for even $150,000, you'd have another $181,000 left to do because I don't think our bid included the playground equipment, some of the asphalt, grass, a lot of those things that we want to do that would make that complex look new and nicer. And so if you could remodel that building for $150,000 and take the other $181,000, put in new asphalt, good drainage, new trees, whatever you want to do, I think you could have your cake and eat it too. I think you could make that facility very nice and be able to salvage that and put new doors, new roof, whatever but I would hope that if we do reconsider this, that we do line items of what we want to do. maybe moving the concession stand to the back isn't as important as we think it is, you know, so maybe we bid that. Maybe we bid to move the restrooms up to the front, which is what they want to do. A new roof, you know, maybe we leave the roof, do stucco on the outside so it looks nicer, but do a line item, and then we can decide which items of remodel we want to or can afford, and how much money that would leave us to improve the rest of the park and make it a truly nice facility. So I think that's about all I had to say on that. I just I know there's some people here tonight, Mayor. I don't know if you'll allow them to speak. I know there's some that came to give their 2 cents as well.
I will, but I'm going to let the rest of the council members if they have anything.
Well, I'd like to hear, personally, I would like to hear from Mr. Myers, and maybe if he has anything to say about, I mean, I've read the report, but I'd love to know if there's any discrepancies in that, or anything that maybe you did that you were under the wrong assumption, because I've read all those same emails that Councilman Cousin referred to in the reports, and there is some, for lack of a better word, I think maybe there's some miscommunication more than anything. I don't think anybody is purposely trying to do anything wrong here, and I think our staff has done due diligence. I just think that maybe some of the reports I read talked about bathrooms and bathroom replacements, and all of a sudden 3 months later and some stuff, we find it's replacing a building. So I don't know if that was just miscommunication or if the scope of work truly changed. So I'd like to hear from you to see if there's anything in your report that maybe is different from what we read here. Is that okay, Mayor?
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Joel Myers. I'm the owner of Gem Engineering. We provided the report for the city staff to evaluate the soil conditions underneath the building. We weren't really hired to decide if it should be repaired or replaced. Just saying that right off the bat. What I will say is, I stand behind what we've said in the report. And there are collapsible soils under there that probably at that time were not considered because of the codes and things that were in place at the time. The fact that it hasn't moved very much, apparently, we haven't evaluated that on our own, but is a good sign. That, so I guess what I'm saying is, just for clarity, there are collapsible soils under there. And if they do receive an increase in moisture content, they could settle, they could move. And so
did your soil testing go straight down from the out? I mean, I've seen where the 2 places where the dirt's been disturbed because you were doing the drilling down there, but there wasn't anything underneath the building, correct?
No, you can't really, we could, but you might, especially with a backhoe, you could actually undermine the foundation and cause a problem. So you have to, but right along the side of it, which is, if you take the footing, the stress from the soil actually does go out from the footing in somewhat of a horizontal direction, a bulb underneath. And so the soils we analyzed were, supporting the structure for sure. So
Joel, what could be done to, I mean, if we did remodel, what could be done to ensure that we could protect it from moisture from getting underneath it?
Yeah, that's the point that
that's the $331,000 question.
Exactly. So there's no 100% guarantees. I'll just say that right off. But there are a lot of things you can do to protect the soil from getting moisture in it, right? You can create moisture barriers. One would be to pour concrete and seal it all the way around, for at least 10 feet out from the structure. Make sure the roof drains are connected and go out to a suitable drainage area where it's not going to impact the structure, those kind of things. Those are in our report under the moisture protection area, but so there are things you can do that will help with that. But if the soils do, receive a little moisture or receive some moisture, substantial moisture, I should say, then they could move. But the fact that it hasn't moved in 30 years or 32 years is pretty good
evidence that it's fairly stable now. But there are things that can be done that, like I said, just keep all the surface moisture away from that area.
What kind of material do you feel is deeper in that area, Joel? I mean,
well, it is right by the Coal Creek Basin there, where we didn't hit gravel in our test hole, but there probably is gravel down fairly shallow below that depth, probably to 10 to 15 feet, probably, I would say.
Is 7 feet, just for me to understand, is 7 feet kind of a standard, or is that what you were requested to do?
Probably
or?
the equipment that was available.
I see.
Believe the city dug the test hole for us. So that was just, and it's a very lightly loaded structure anyway. It's really not very heavy. And so normally the loads are dissipated within that depth, to a point where they're not influencing soil deeper.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
Can I ask you a question?
You bet.
So we've had a water leak that's continuing to have water under there. How does that, because you've mentioned the concept of keeping moisture out.
Right.
But we know that there is all of this moisture under there currently.
So, Mayor, can I interject there? I talked to Ken before the meeting and asked him about the water leak. And he said there's no evidence of water bubbling up in the slab. It's out front on the south doors out from the building. So
Parks is telling me that they had crews down there today to pull electrical out of the building, and they dug a hole to get to the electrical, and water was bubbling into the hole. So that's concerning that there's actual water in the soil today
underneath the building.
Hole.
That's what they're telling us.
When was the quote water leak discovered? I mean, was it last summer? Was it
Middle of last summer, they found the water leak.
Okay.
June, July, somewhere in there. They found the water bubbling up from the asphalt.
I'm just trying to get the timetable of all this together as we look at everything.
But that's asphalt. That's outside the building, right? Is there ever
next to the building is where the water was bubbling up.
So you've got a 3-foot foundation. So whether there's water from that underneath or not, we don't know. We'd have to probably dig up a slab and test it, right?
Yeah, I mean, that could be further evaluated if the water has already saturated the soils beneath the foundation. In the areas that we did, it was not to the point of saturation at the time we did the holes.
Okay.
But when they moved the power transformer yesterday, they had water getting in the...
There's water bleeding in.
So it's concerning that there's water in and around the soils on the building.
Okay. Yeah, and that's a risk. Yeah, that's what I'm saying is there's a risk with the soils the way they are. There is a solution too, though. I mean, you could underpin the foundation during the remodel, even if you were concerned with that. You wouldn't have to wait for it to move. So that could be a consideration.
Is the water that's apparently leaking, is that from our building, or is it coming from some other source, or we don't know?
All we know is we were digging a hole to move the electrical, and the hole started filling with water. Now, it's not gushing water. It's not a river or anything like that.
Right.
The water was infiltrating into the hole.
But I mean, does our water to the building come underneath the concrete slab for the machines and the sinks and stuff like that?
The pipe, the supply line comes between the restrooms under the stairs that goes upstairs.
Under the stairs,
it's an inch and a half galvanized line that comes up right there. And I'm not sure, I don't know which
where it
direction
comes in.
from there.
Yeah. Okay.
So what more would you have to do to feel comfortable with all of these issues that have just been discussed?
I think the soils are what they are, so if they have received moisture, that's an issue. But like I said, the only other alternative would be to underpin it if you want to keep the building, and that would be, you could do as much moisture protection as you could, find the leak right now, fix it, whatever, get it resolved. Those are things that can be done. And then evaluate the building fully for distress conditions would be one thing. We could do a manometer survey of the floor slab,
It would basically give you a contour map of the floor slab to see if it's moved. It sounds like on the corners it was inch and, what did you say? You made?
Well, the outside of the building, it was an inch and a quarter.
Inch and a quarter.
The south, the northeast corner and northwest corner was about 3/8 of an inch difference in height, and then it's a little lower on the south end.
On that southwest,
Yeah,
southeast
probably
side.
about another 5/8 of an inch or 3/4.
We haven't evaluated as far as the distress report, I guess. We do offer that service, but yeah.
In your report, did you notice the salinity of the soil?
What we did do solubility analysis, which and it was
Let's get a different way. Are salty soils bad on ductile iron pipes?
yes.
Note the condition of the soil, whether or not it was salty or not.
We didn't do salt analysis. We did do water soluble minerals analysis.
Salt. There you go.
Paragraph 5.6 of the report, based on similar studies performed in the area, the on-site soils contain salt in sufficient concentration to be considered corrosive to both concrete and metal. Would that have an issue with the pipes?
Yes, it can.
What would you recommend replacing the pipes with if that's the condition?
Well, usually PVC is better. So. But that's a problem we have in the whole valley, basically.
Sure.
So.
Thank you. That helped me. I don't know
Okay.
about others,
Yeah.
but
Thank you.
Me a
All
lot.
right. Thank you.
I want to say one more thing. In no way am I saying anything negative about our engineering department. I think they're top notch. I think we're very fortunate to have them. Jonathan and Kit and the whole crew, they're just amazing. And I think we got going fast, and we interpreted that one report maybe a little different than we should have, and we're going fast, and they're doing the best they can. And I don't, like I say, I don't hold anything against them. That's my opinion, that we veered off a little right there with that one email and decided to tear it down. So
Yeah, I'd agree. They do a fantastic job. They're good engineers. They've saved you a lot of money over the years. So
thanks, Joel.
Okay.
Thank you.
Does the council have other?
I have a few comments. I've also worked and read a lot of these same emails that the rest of the council has. And this project has been in the works for a long time to renovate the Bicentennial Park. Specifically, we were going to start with that building. As I looked through the minutes, I too couldn't identify exactly when it changed from looking at renovating it to redoing it. I know there was a meeting, the Bicentennial Park Concessions Building meeting agenda in June 28th. At that point, they were still talking about review of existing foundation. We need to dig some test pits, have gem engineering test it. We need to check the foundation of the locations and whatnot to determine whether it was, whether the footings were stable and whatnot. Sometime between that point and August, the plan changed. I'm not sure that I think that that's significant because of the fact that it was recommended by our engineers in our engineering department that we not build on those existing footings and the building be replaced. I did ask Paul to maybe comment on his comment during that meeting. We've talked about that a little bit. Do you want to explain what was behind when you told us that the footings were bad?
So Tim's letter indicates he looked in the gem engineering report and he didn't find a sentence that said the footings ain't good. And I'm not so really surprised because out of all the engineering reports I've ever reviewed, they never say something's not good. So we asked Gem Engineering Cedar City to conduct a visual review of existing footings and compaction testing of soil and excavations adjacent to footings in an effort to determine if the existing footing would be suitable for reuse under a newly constructed single-story restroom building. And then we got the report back that said the soils underneath there are red and brown sandy soils showing moisture all the way down to 7 feet deep. The footings are normally at 3 feet deep. And the recommendation in the report included over excavation and recompaction. That's where the footings ain't good came from, that was the recommendation to over excavate, recompact. And I don't know how you do that and leave the existing footings in place while you're doing it.
Okay, thank you. Based on that, we moved forward, voted on that. Our engineering department went forward with designing the building and estimating the costs. They were looking at all the advantages of where to put that building. They talked with the police department, I understand, about moving the restrooms to the north side to increase the safety out there and also reduce the vandalism because they could patrol it from the parking lot side. Came before the council on August 15th, and at our work meeting, we discussed it. Nobody had any questions. Came before the council the following meeting. All of us voted on it, as we've talked about, and then our staff went forward with putting that out to bid. On the November 14th meeting, we awarded that low bid to Church Construction. Paul did descend on that because of the cost, and you've heard his request to look at it. But I feel that I respectfully disagree with some of the representations that's been made on social media and also in the news article that's been circulated. I too met with Clay Bullock 2 times, and he would be here tonight to discuss this himself, but he left for Hawaii this morning, so lucky him. But he did send me an email, gave me permission to read his email, which I would like to share. This dated November 27th. Terry, in regards to our conversation about the Centennial Park building, I spent less than 30 minutes viewing the building with Paul Cousins with limited information about possible problems that may have occurred underneath the slab or structure itself. Visually, I noted that the concrete work was extremely poor. There did not appear to be any visible cracks in the structure other than normal block expansion and contraction. Because I am not an engineer, I cannot make a solid recommendation on what to do with the building. As I stated previously, water leaks and water problems are 90% of the reason for building failure. If the engineers have determined that the water has had a negative impact on the building, they would know best on what to do with the structure, such as stabilize and remodel or remove and rebuild. The city council would determine what the needs are and what the use of the building would be for the future. Because of it, I have done a lot of piering and stabilization of buildings in the southern Utah area. Piers could cost a minimum of $2,000 per pier. They're typically set 6 foot apart and placed in the areas of failure. Again, the soil and structural engineers would determine pier placement. I did not, nor have I given any estimates regarding costs to remodel the building. Costs would be determined by an architect, engineer, and through a bidding process. As you know, costs for bathrooms can be the biggest percentage of the cost of a commercial building. Having been a commercial contractor for many years, I have found there are instances where remodeling an existing building can be more expensive than tearing down and building a new building. The costs are based on whether the existing building meets required codes, ADA requirements, physical access to the building, and whether the structure meets the needs based on the utilization of the building now and in the future. This is not a cut and dry situation, and the City Council knows best the intent for the use and need of this building. Possibly a consideration would be to have plans drawn to outline the needs of the building and obtain estimates for both remodeling the existing and to demo the building and rebuild a building meeting the needs of the city. This process would likely cause delays in the process, may allow prices to rise over time. As he pointed out in his initial meeting with Paul, he was not told that there had been water under the building. He told me this really nullified all of his comments with regards to the stability of the building. He also explained that since the water break was recent, that sometimes the footings will hold in place for a while, and then they'll slowly start to give way and crumble as, that pressure mounts on them. So even though the building appears to be stable right now, over the next year, he said we could see some subsidence issues on that. But it's really just an unknown. Some of this other stuff we've talked, pardon me while I kind of skip through it. I think it's important to note that the recent news article being circulated and published by Cedar City News and the social media representations are heavily quoting Clay Bullock. He adamantly disputes any claims to have quoted construction costs and other items as cited there. I concur with Clay that the comments regarding the high costs of renovation, especially in this case, we have a lot of unknown factors underground. If we do something with this building, we have to make it ADA compatible. For the restrooms, there could be seismic upgrades that weren't required 40 years ago, providing the adequate drainage around the building, just to name a few. Remodeling costs have been presented to the public by Paul. However, to my knowledge, they don't have any basis. There has not been an actual cost estimate or a bid. Paul also presented a report he got from Tim Watson, who I also met with this past week, and Tim confirmed to me that his report only certified to the stability of the building above ground. He didn't comment or certify to the condition of the soils or the footings of the building, as the pits were already filled at the time that he made the inspection. He also stated to me he didn't dispute any facts in Gem Engineering's report about the soils information. I feel that the city and the staff have completed their due diligence in exploring all of the options related to the renovation or rebuilding of this facility. We all recognize the costs are high. Despite what has been presented to the public over the past week, each and every one of us takes responsibility for and respectful of the taxpayer funds we've been entrusted with. In fact, I believe it's fiscally irresponsible to invest possibly another $200,000 of taxpayer monies into a 40-year-old building that could potentially have issues. In the end, we have a very expensive retrofit building that doesn't serve the needs of our citizens now or in the future. I feel very passionate about this project. It's priority. It's necessary to give the citizens on the north end of Cedar City a nice park to enjoy with their families. And I, for one, would like to see the project move forward.
I want to make a few comments a little bit on the history that's outside of what we talked about, just quickly without getting into a lot of detail. But I've said on these recreation, leisure services, trails, all of them, I sat on all those committees, have done for several years since the mayor assigned me. The remodel of the Bicentennial Park came up for discussion as we were first working on the master plan for Parks and Rec, which many of you were involved in and are very familiar with in the city when that took place. There were several items that went along in the master plan discussions, the building being one, other areas, upgrading the areas around there, the parking facilities and everything else. As I listened to, we have 6 citizens on each of those committees. that represent our community. And I value their input highly as a council member, because they're the watchdogs. They have the kids at play. They are heavily involved in recreation around our community, from walking our trails to riding their bikes to all the participation that those individuals do. And they're a very highly recommended group by myself. And I respect their opinions on these kinds of issues. And one thing that's been expressed continually through the process on Bicentennial, like I said, it started with a master plan. Leisure Services discusses Bicentennial all the time. And then it ended up going to the RAP Tax Committee the last couple of years. The building was in there, but it was clear down at the bottom. It was not a high priority at the time. There were some other high priorities that the committees felt took priority. For example, our golf course irrigation and other things that we've spent some money on to upgrade that to help the economy in Cedar City. And I look at this as an economic issue. I always look at it as an economic perspective. I know a lot of people that sit up here don't look at it that way. I do. I look at the big picture of what's going to be bringing into Cedar City. This complex is heavily used in the spring and through the fall. And the comments I've heard about the restrooms are disgusting. I've been told that they scrub and clean and have tried to do the best they can, and they still smell like urine to the public, which tells me that it's an extremely old building. And we have all agreed here tonight it's an old building and probably needs to be replaced. And so I think maybe this is more from a cosmetic approach, but the people that come to our city with these teams, these fields are heavily used for playing games for tournaments that bring in 30 teams to our community, made up of 12 to 13 individuals and parents and everything else. So economically, think of the motel rooms, the restaurants, and everything else that this does to our community. So I feel personally that upgrading this Bicentennial facility has a big future impact to the citizens of Cedar City and to the economics. And yes, it has been set aside because of lack of enough funds, and some funds have been found thanks to our engineering department. They always save us thousands of dollars, in this case $78,000 on a light project that could be put towards this. And I think that's a very good use of the money. The RAP Tax Committee saw and got the information that the money was going to be transferred from the light project to projects at Bicentennial. And they were all over it. And it was a unanimous vote to use that money to upgrade the Bicentennial area with the building or whatever else, needed to be used for those funds. So I just wanted to insert that. That's a whole different side to the technical stuff. But anyway, I felt like the public needs to know that there has been a lot of public look at this facility, and I understand what they want to do with it. And moving the building is key to some ideas for future family areas around the softball complex. And yes, I agree, we need some more playground equipment on the north end of town. This is a start, with only things in the future depending on how things work out.
This bid doesn't include the playground, though, does it? Right?
No, but there's some other money available for that too.
I'd like to ask, and Wade, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I think maybe Ken wasn't even with us at the time, but I'm curious to know, in the thinking of putting this building together, whether it was to be renovated or new building, what was the budget you were working with, and how did you come about trying to put this building together?
Wade Orm, Parks Division Head. So we were given the money of the budget of $265,000 for the renovation that what was moved over. We had an itemized list of what we thought would be the most advantageous with the money, what would be best suited for it. We originally looked at the remodel aspect of it. The building is a lot larger than it needed to be, but we were willing to work with that. When we got the report that the foundations was no good, that we decided, well, if we're going to need to tear down the building, we might as well go all the way forward and try to plan for the future. Move the building back. We can reduce the size, make the surroundings a little bit more open, closer to more of the atmosphere like Filled at the Hills, where we draw in tournaments used for those things. There was a long list of things that we were looking at to do. The parking lot, asphalt, playground equipment, all these things, trees, grass, and a lot of those things we decided that some of them we can do on our own as far as removing the asphalt, putting in trees, putting in grass. Those are very minimal things that my staff would be able to do. So all those other things, we all prioritized them, and we found that we thought that the building was the top priority. It would make the biggest impact on the complex. It would make the quickest difference on how the complex was.
Well, where I'm struggling with is on the timeline, and so just bear with me for just a minute and correct me where I'm wrong, okay? So you were talking about renovating the building and having $265,000 to do that with, and then when you found out the foundations or the soils may be impacted, whatever the term we want to use, then you thought that maybe a new building is the right way to go.
Yeah, the thought process is if we clean up everything around it and make that look nice and new, but we still have this dilapidated building in the center.
The report wasn't done till August. I mean, it was turned in August. I don't know when it was ordered. I don't know when the report was ordered. But we had to be thinking about the building and some design elements prior to that, I'm assuming.
Yeah, we did. We took it and we said, if we're going to remodel it, this is, what we would want.
Yeah.
And that was part of it, was moving the bathrooms to the other side of the building. When the building was built, we didn't have the skate park. We didn't have the trail. That parking lot in the morning always has 4 or 5 cars, sometimes up to 10, where people are just using the trails. It's become a big trailhead. The skate parks are always being used. So we found or thought that having the bathrooms on the other side is better for what the entire complex, not just the softball, but the entire area would be better suited to have the bathrooms
Also
on the other
safety,
side.
I think, given the lights in the parking lot.
The lights in the parking lot and all those things. So as the area has changed and grown with the city, we figured it would be time to, adjust the building as well to what the entire area is being used for.
So Wade, I have a question. You mentioned there was a report that said the foundation is bad. Can you give me a reference to that report?
That was just from what engineering told me.
Okay.
So engineering they did all the reports and the studies, and they got the report that they told us that the soil, it wouldn't be suitable for.
I would like to see a report produced that says that foundation's bad.
I'm just saying what
I understand.
What the engineering told us.
That's my biggest problem with this whole process. Is somewhere along the line somebody came out and said those foundations were bad, and they're not. I mean, there's no evidence of that.
If I say foundation, I'm just saying that they didn't suggest on a remodel. Like the soils was not around there.
A combination of things led them to believe that it was not in the best interest.
The best interest to remodel.
So the other question I have is, did you ever observe water bubbling up out of the concrete inside the building?
No, not inside the building.
Because Ken told me the leak is outside on the asphalt.
I have no idea where the leak actually is.
Is that right, Ken? Is that what you told me earlier? The leak is outside on the asphalt.
Sounds like they don't know really where the leak is.
That's where it bubbled up, but you don't know where it's originating from.
No, you don't. But Joel, a question for you is, could we do a couple core drills to see how wet it is under there and how much moisture in the soil? Would that be hard to do? Could we do that?
Well, didn't he already certify that it's wet down to the 7-foot depth?
It's
I thought the
damp. What did your
report
report say?
moderately.
Moist.
Will you come up and talk in the microphone?
I read the report and it said it's moist. It doesn't say it's
moderate
wet.
collapsible
Moderately.
soil.
And it says moderately moist in it too.
Yeah, it's not saturated. It's moderately. It's got moisture in it. It's moderately compressible. It has to do with the physical property of the soil.
How would that compare to any other hole you dug in Cedar City as far as moisture in the soil?
It's all of them have some moisture in them, and so it's probably a little bit more moist than some of the others, but it's not saturated like that. When we did it, there was no water bleeding out of the side walls or anything like that.
And it's a block foundation, so if it was that saturated, you'd probably see some of that evidence, right?
Yeah, the block foundation does allow moisture to come through, but the slab's probably up on the top, so it'd still have to come up through the concrete in that case. But
Thank you. I just want to complete my comments and I'll be done, but I wanted to thank you, Wade, for that. I just appreciate that information more than anything. And I also want to say that I concur with much of what Councilman Hartley had to say. I firmly believe that the north end of town, we need to do something to help this part in this park specifically. And I think we had maybe a series of missteps, again, through no one's fault. And it was a fast-moving train, but I think that we still need to look at trying to make this project work as it is. And it was presented and passed by the council.
Wade, Orem Parks Division Head Ken asked me to also mention that the leak that has been talked about was noticed in July. We shut it off prior to the SU tournament that was in August. It was over a weekend. They came in, shut off the water. We came back in right before the tournament. I said, we'll turn the water on. How fast does it take for the water to come up? Within 2 hours, there's a huge puddle in front of the bathrooms. Like Councilman Hartley noticed or said, we don't know where the leak is. We just know where it's coming up. That water has been off since then. So at the beginning of August, the water's been shut off to the building. The irrigation has been shut off since mid-October. So there's no other water around there. And I observed it as we were pulling the wires out, that there was moisture coming through the block nearest to the bathrooms. That's where the wires were closest to the bathrooms. We were pulling the wires out. There was not a lot, but it was enough to have moisture coming.
Was
through
it
the block.
running, or was it running water, or was it just moist?
No, it was like as if there was water. I mean, it wasn't like it was just, there was visibly wet. Like if I stuck my finger on it and come off, it was wet as if I just stuck it in water. Would I say it was running? No, it's not like gushing out or like an irrigation leak, but given time with the soil being removed, water started to come through. So.
Thank you.
Yep.
Are there other comments from the council members? All right. With that, I know there were some individuals that maybe still, I don't know if you do, if you don't, wanted to talk to this issue. If you do, will you come up, state your name?
Hi, my name's Cheryl Stratton, and I guess that I'm just here to request you guys to do a little bit more testing before you make a final decision tonight. This could really save us a lot of money that could be put into other areas. It's really important to us taxpayers that you do it. We would depend on you guys to make the right choices with our money. We elected you. Just take a little bit more time and do a little bit more evaluation before you make a decision. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Milton McClelland. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Councilman. There seems to be a feeling that
people, the council, some of the council seems to think that the citizens think you guys did a bad job. I don't think that's the case at all. I think a lot of people think the city and everyone is taking all the interest at heart here. And the fact that everyone's passionate about this is proof positive that it should be done. But let's make sure we do it right. And it seemed like the biggest pressure in the last work meeting was we wanted to get it done for spring training so that we could have it ready for next year. Okay, I get why that is, and I get the revenue that's generated from that. But if we took a little bit more time and we saved $181,000 potentially, right? Everything's potential. This is part of the problem. Going back to Councilman Hartley's thing, you mentioned that everything that Councilman Cousins says is potential. And I'd go back to the same thing, that you're comfortable with the potential that you've listed, and Paul's comfortable with the potential he's listed. What if we do a little bit more study and actually find out that it is possible to save that money that we could use in other areas? If, however, it comes back that the foundations are bad, then you haven't really done anything but put off a little bit of time and maybe put off one season. Is the building in danger of collapsing? Are we looking at a safety issue? So we're talking about one season that could potentially save a lot of money. That, to me, as a citizen, is worth taking the time. And I agree with Councilman Isom that when he said in the last meeting that it needs to be top shelf. I agree. We want our facilities to look good, to draw people to the city. So if it takes a little bit more time to get it right, isn't that better? And that's where I'd leave it.
Thank you. I figured you were going to come up. I was just kind of.
I could feel you staring at me, Brad Green.
I was like, he's sitting back there. Every other time he's sitting back there, he comes up. So
That's okay. I just wanted to say thank you guys for even, deliberating this. I want to say thanks to Councilman Cousins for bringing it to our attention. Many people question the social media tactic, but we now have reporters here that we haven't seen at City Council in a long, long time. And for some odd reason, social media brought out the reporters. So that's wonderful. Thank you, Paul.
Actually, I personally invited her to come because we haven't had coverage at our meetings.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you for the correction too. It does seem that we have more reporters when we have, what would be a nice way to say this, an online fight happening. It seems that draws out the reporters a little bit more frequently. So I appreciate that. I appreciate the engagement. It's interesting. People know that I like to watch how these things transpire. And all week, people have been calling me, people have been talking to me, and the community is engaged in this topic. And I think the community engagement is a wonderful thing. I echo the remarks of some of my other cohorts on the back row. I think there's potential to be more wise with the stewardship we've been given. If the building is problematic, it's worth knowing that for sure, because realistically, we could use a better parking lot. My kids use that facility quite frequently in the spring, and the fields are pretty nice. But the parking lot, not so much. Realistically, we haven't even noticed the building. I haven't. But I noticed that we park in the dirt because the parking lot's full. And a parking lot, we build a lot of parking lots in my business, even though that's not the business we're in. We need a place to put pipe and cars. They're not that expensive. And you don't need, epoxy coating on the floor. Anyway, I would encourage that you take a little bit more time. You reconsider the vote that already happened, just to take some time to prove whether or not there's a reason to knock the whole thing down and start big. Otherwise, if we can do it on the cheap and get some other good things done, I think that's overall a better solution. And it probably won't even cost a season because it doesn't take that long to research. That's what I would encourage you to do. Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Jenny Hendricks, I just wanted to say that to hear water and collapsible soil and galvanized pipes is frightening as a taxpayer. I don't want my tax dollars gambled with. And to have that combination in the 20 years that I've done real estate in this area, I have seen homes tried to be fixed and they haven't. Trailside, Ashdown Forest, 500 East, Foothill area. Those are all areas where people keep thinking that they can do something with these soils and it's not working. So I appreciate the council's investigation to this point, and am glad that having a top shelf facility is out there. Thank you.
Real quick.
You didn't state your name.
Tom Jett. Quick for catching.
Seriously?
It's age. I've witnessed a lot of council meetings. Many of them have been very personal attacks. Very, very ugly. This is true democracy when we watch. There's disagreements, there's discussion, there's comments. This is what our body should be. What all political bodies should be. What we're witnessing tonight is not personal attacks, but open dialogue. Whichever way you vote, that's the most important thing we should take is the fact that it's not personal. Thank you.
Mike Green, Southwest Plumbing Supply.
Hey, thanks for saying your name.
You're very welcome. I know there's been a lot of discussion about water and pipes, and that's why I decided to stand up. Water and pipes happen to be my business. Been in it for 30 years, and I can tell you that water and pipe leaks happen every day, all the time, all over the city, and we don't have buildings crumbling all over the city. It is something that can be solved and not solved at a very high price. Pipes can be replaced. Honestly, a leak doesn't ruin a building. Water is meant to be on the ground. At any rate, I would support looking further into what it would cost to replace or to renovate the building, because having done dozens and dozens of renovations over the years, there's always better value given to the owner than to start new and pay the excessive construction costs, especially in our current construction climate. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
All right. Are there any other comments, questions from council?
Well, I guess maybe the only question I would have is, and I don't know the answer to this, so I'm looking to the experts here. What other tests or what other things do we need to look at that would satisfy people that seem to be concerned about it? And so what are those tests, and how long does it take to do them? And of course, what is it going to cost to get it done? I mean, I don't know what those are. Yeah, come on up.
Like, wow, just
the question I posed before.
yeah.
Joel Myers, Gym Engineering.
Hey, thanks.
So really, the test for the soils is adequate for me to know what you've got. The only other thing that we could do is to see the condition of the floor totally. It might undulate, it might do a lot of things that would indicate it's already moved, but the evidence that it's not really cracking on the foundation perimeter shows me that it's at this point it hasn't moved very much, but we could do that. Really, to come down to it, it's just a matter of what risk you want to take with the building. And if you can fix the leak, protect the soils from being moisture, get moisture in them, much better than it has it currently, but it has performed over 30 years, which is encouraging. But there still is risk no matter what, so I just it's a hard question, and that's why
So you're not going to guarantee us, huh?
There's no guarantee that it'll never move, Yeah. And so that kind of becomes the question, do you want to accept a little bit of risk and maybe just evaluate, actually get a remodel bid, or do you want to
Well, we have to get a remodel design.
Yeah.
We can't just do a remodel
True.
bid without a design.
True. So, yeah, so those are the things that you have to consider, and then as a council decide, from my standpoint, there's always going to be some risk no matter what. But you can minimize that risk, and the building has performed. So those are the things you got to kind of look at.
Joel, how much risk is there with a new building?
There's some risk with a new building too.
Okay. Is it equal? I mean, is it, if you do testing and see that that's not moved and there's not, I mean, if we do some core drilling, could we core drill a couple spots and see how wet it is under there?
Yeah, you can do that. We could do that, see how much moisture has already infiltrated the soils right adjacent to the building. There are things that can be done.
One thing that concerns me is they said they want to burn it down. How many thousands of gallons are we going to put out the fire? What's that going to do to the soil?
Yeah, those soils will have to be excavated anyway if you do a new building.
We saturate the soil and build a new building and it settles.
Yeah.
Phillips.
Kit,
Come here.
are you satisfied with the testing that we've done as our engineer?
Well, I have a lot of respect for Joel and his work, and but the original soils report, we based our decision on that. As far as there was a recommendation in there that the foundation was not adequate, and we went with that. So I feel like that, if even though it's a lot more money, that I'm not sure that we're going to be totally happy if we try to remodel it. I heard some things last night, even at the ball game, that the restroom stalls are hardly wide enough to get in and out of, and it's just not very functional now for the type of building it's intended to be. So, thank you.
I guess that was going to be my maybe final question, is that if you still recommend, if the recommendation is still in place, or has there been things tonight that have swayed your opinion that you would like to look at, or do you still stand with the original recommendation?
Yeah, but based on what I've heard, if we've got free water running out from underneath the building, that's a big concern. There must be something that's causing that, either a broken pipe underneath the building. When I hear things like that, and that concerns me.
But don't we have just one water line feeding that building, Kit? Couldn't that be replaced pretty easily?
Well, the question is what's underneath the building? How does the water lines run underneath the building, and what's leaking underneath?
Well, there's just one line that feeds that riser that comes underneath it. There's just one line, and then it feeds off to a sink in the bathroom. It's all open in there. You can see all the plumbing. There's just 1.5 inch galvanized line coming up on the floor, and so there's only one line feeding that building, and then everything else is exposed that I can see. So, are you basing your judgment, Kit, on the report that Jim gave us, or on a report you made?
Yeah, it was a fairly firm recommendation that the foundation was not adequate.
But would you agree that was in context of an email that said we were going to tear it down and try to reuse the footing and foundation?
I didn't know of any email. I just knew of the soils report.
Let me pull that out real quick. There's an email I talked to Jonathan on the phone. He sent me an email from Jim. Here's the email from Jim regarding the foundation. This is to me. Jonathan, based on the review, we recommend replacing the foundation. However, as far as over excavation recommendations, we won't have that until tomorrow. So when I talked to Jonathan, I asked him if because over excavation is mentioned in the same sentence that was talking about, and because the actual report was called the replacement. And I asked him, and he admitted to me that is in that context based on should we reuse that foundation if we tear the building down, not that the foundation is bad. And Jonathan, I think you'll remember a conversation. You admitted to me that was the case. So
Phillips.
So in this case,
You have to say your
Mike
name.
Phillips, the fire department. Sorry, Mayor. In this case, the intent is to burn down the building. We'll use very little water on it. We did one out in Enoch. We sprayed maybe a couple 100 gallons of water in our training exercise, and in the end, we burn it up. That's the intent here. Thank you.
Yeah. If you state your name. Common theme.
I wouldn't be paying attention if I didn't state my name.
Yeah.
So Joey Church Construction. I'm kind of the innocent bystander and caught up in the middle of this thing. But I feel like there's just some facts that I'd like to give. And basically it points to the cost breakdown. One of the things I'd like to point out, does this thing work?
There's a button on that. Yeah, there you go.
On the side. Do I gotta hold it?
Yeah.
Man, I need more caffeine.
Well,
Okay.
they've all had too much caffeine.
But I gotta pee. I don't want to catch 22. Anyway, one thing I wanted to point out is the total, the cost, the 331 includes improvement in the surrounding areas, which involves removing the asphalt, adding structural grade, and then re-implementing asphalt along with a storm drain system, which is a good piece of the cost. So it's not accurate that the whole cost is just for the building. And so I just want the public to kind of understand that. The other thing, going through the cost breakdown, and these are bids that were received in the last 30 days, so they're still accurate. First, the sewer lateral, which needs to be done, is $6,000. The surveying, which needs to be done as you're redoing the surfaces, I've got $1,500. You'll have soils and geo testing. There's a budget of $1,500, and I'm just making transparent my proposal. Obviously, we were the winning bid because we were the lowest of 6 bidders. There's the cost of mobilizing and demobilizing, bonding. You know, those costs, they add up $5,000-$10,000. You've got concrete work that would need to be done, regardless if the building stayed or didn't stay. And just the exterior is $11,500. Your asphalt is, and structural is over $22,000. You've got plumbing for the new plumbing would be $45,000. And I firmly believe if it was dealt with an existing building, that price would go up. As well as electrical, you've got $32,000. There was 3 other electrical bids. They are all in the $50,000 range. We had one electrician that wanted to make a point that he wanted to work for the city and gave a really good deal to the city, you know, so, but at the same time, if it was to deal with existing conditions, those prices would go up. And so as you go down through the different costs, those are some of the big items. I believe to remodel the building, coming from a builder's aspect and talking with our subcontractors, the price would be about the same or more than doing the new construction. And then if you take the economics into play of with all the people coming to Cedar, the influence that building has on the sports and the people that want to be in Cedar City and enjoy the surroundings, it's gonna increase revenue, obviously, if you keep bringing those people into town and support these facilities. So that's kind of, I guess, my opinion on the economic side. So there's a lot of costs that are involved that aren't only targeting the building. So it's not a true counter to say that the building costs 330,000 when accurately the building might be 250. So, and by the time you try to revamp it and go through one example, the concession roll-up doors for the new concessions, and they would need them as well on a remodel. Just those concession roll-up doors are 10,600. And so there's just a lot of costs that the public doesn't understand. And so they rely on the staff and the councilman to, you know, obviously do this homework. And I feel like a wonderful job's been done here. I also think Paul Cousins is done a wonderful job wanting to consider those other options. But as a builder and someone who is very involved with these costs, it's not going to save any money. That's my statement. So,
Joey, are the roll-up doors, could they be reused that are there? Are they worn out? Or?
The whole building could be reused, but you're left with an old building. So the point is, you could do nothing and save money, or you can make a new building. So the question I would propose is, if you spent 330,000 either way for a remodel or a new building, which would you rather have?
Well, I disagree with the cost.
I know you disagree, and I have solid information from subcontractors, line item.
Let's take it.
What these costs would be.
Let's take some time and you know.
If it went to redesign, I don't know if RAP tax money disappears or if it is reallocated year after year. I don't know those things, but I do know time is of the essence, and having been awarded the project as it's delayed, I know that potentially affects my ability to do a good job with the building. It gets to be more difficult dealing with the winter conditions. And so I also do feel that the heat is on, and I'm in the limelight way more than I probably want to be with all this controversy. And so it's like, man, everybody says you better do a dang good job. And so hopefully this project moves forward and we could have a beautiful facility for that area, which in my opinion really needs the attention. You know, it is, and I've talked to lots of people in the community. It's basically a hub for this master plan to beautify this area where lots of people are starting to come to enjoy the walkway, the bikeway, the skate park. I mean, all those uses that, you know. I think a beautiful new building that will serve for another 40 years I think it's justified. And I really don't think you're going to save money doing a remodel, and I think you'll lose opportunity. So
thank you.
That's my thoughts.
Thank you for sharing some of those exact costs too. That's interesting.
Well, Adam Hahn. I saw you going for it. I appreciate you guys staying late. I had to go to a thing with my daughters, so I just got back. So I appreciate you guys sticking around.
Oh yeah, we'd love to stick it around.
We're here for you, Adam.
I wanted to start off by publicly apologizing to any of you if I've offended you by Ron by talking in person or through email or social media. If I've issued any offense, I do apologize for that. I am a fiscal conservative. Those are my standings, and I believe that when we're talking about taxpayer money, it's worth taking the time to look at all options. When you look at cities, what's the most beautiful, most elaborate, and most decadent of all the buildings in a city? And it's government buildings. And I don't know if that's necessarily the way it should be. Now, I know that buildings need to be built to last time because the city is potentially an eternal or at least a long time entity. So I know that there's a lot of things that go into these buildings that make them expensive. And I appreciate that. But I just appreciate the idea of taking time to look at options. Now, tearing it down may very well be the best option. But if we don't fully examine the aspect of a remodel with putting it out to bid and letting people get numbers on it, I don't think we've really done due diligence enough to spend taxpayer money and be comfortable with, spending other people's money on a project and saying we did a good job for the taxpayers. So I appreciate you guys' time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Does the council have any other comments, questions? Want to motions, anything? If not, that's the last item on your agenda. So you can decide what you would like to do. And if I don't get a motion on this, then I need a motion to end the meeting.
Motion to adjourn this meeting and move into closed session.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Oh, what? That one has to be a roll call. I literally have that written on my paper. We'll start with Councilwoman Hartley.
Aye.
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 All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming and
Thank you very
spending
much.
a later evening here with us.
So what you the comfort drilling, what would give you the comfort that you need for drilling around the building?
Yeah, you start that if everybody thinks it's full of water, let's drill some holes in the concrete. Do a core drill that down.
Hey, what's
up? Thanks for sharing, Matt.
Thank
Yep.
you.
So
Thank you. I wish we could go home.
Tells people to go to her office. Like a principal. Come to my office. Okay.
Yeah, me too.
Thanks for all of that
sharing those
information.
costs. That was very insightful.
That was a good, healthy debate.
Yes.
Thanks for taking the abuse.
Yeah. It's taken it from me. It's taken it with the Home Builders Association, them and me both, which I don't understand at all. Like an association that
you may
wants to build stuff in the community is giving us so much crap.
Set my mom. She was scared. I was like, you have a closed session. You can go stare. There's this tree you did.
I've remodeled a lot. I've remodeled 10 of them. Was it settled?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Have fun. Just glad that one. Okay. Just glad this one. Okay. Let me get everything.
Short-term rentals.
Yeah. Now I gotta go to therapy. Yeah, exactly. You heard that, right?
It has a Pioneer home, right? Probably rock foundation.
I know. You need to be. You need to be.